recording. Oh, okay. Oh my gosh, that's Dr. Okay. Okay, wait, guys. Wait, let me, okay. Today, the Science Fiction Club has an extremely special guest. He has won more Aurora Awards than any other author. He's won the Hugo Award, the Nebula Award, and the John W. Campbell Award, the top 3 highest honors in the field of science fiction. In 2014, he was honored with the Edward E. Smith Memorial Award for his lifetime contributions to science fiction, both through his work in the literary world and for exemplifying the personal qualities becoming the Skylark recipient. I am pleased to announce the author of The Terminal Experiment, Calculating God, Frame Shift, The Downloaded, and many more, Dr. Robert J. Sawyer.
Hello, everybody. Glad to be here. Thank you so much for asking. Delighted to join you.
Oh, yes. Okay. Let me go ahead and let you go. Did you want to start with the speech, or we have so many questions, by the way, but I'll let you go ahead.
Well, I'll simply say hello. Welcome. I'm in Toronto, Canada. My mother is from California, though. She grew up in Berkeley, so there's some connection between where you are and where I am. I just got back last night from Calgary, Alberta, where I was away on a little writing retreat. And prior to that, I was 2 weeks in China because I was author guest of honor this year at the World Science Fiction Convention, which for the first time ever was being held in Chengdu, China. So I'm somewhat jet-lagged and not quite sure what time zone I'm in, and you guys are 3 hours ahead of me. It's 5 o'clock in the afternoon here, but I'm delighted that you're interested in my work, and I'm happy to join you. And probably the best thing is simply to answer whatever questions you've got. I'm happy to discuss any aspect, the creative, the philosophical, the business aspects of writing. Whatever you guys are interested in, I'm happy to address.
Do you guys mind if I go first here with a few questions? Okay. First question that actually quite a few people wanted to ask was, in your novel, The Calculating God, you turn the sci-fi trope of the atheistic aliens on its head with the introduction of a species that are not only devoutly religious, but scientifically religious as well, with many of the rituals directly matching with spiritual rituals, such as creation explanations, prayer, virgin births, etc. What was the inspiration for such a decision, and do you personally feel that it is more likely that aliens will be atheistic, agnostic, or theistic?
Okay, let's take it a step at a time here. First, what was the inspiration? I'm an atheist, and I have felt for a very long time that the hard atheist community has been doing itself an enormous amount of disservice in the world of public discourse. When I started sort of getting seriously, I've always been an atheist ever since I was a little kid, but when I sort of started getting seriously interested in it, one of the principal rational magazines was The Skeptical Inquirer, published by the very ostentatiously named Committee for the Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal, Scientific Investigation of Claims of the Paranormal. And when it started out, The Skeptical Inquirer actually did that. If somebody said they could bend spoons, like Uri Geller famously did in the 70s, by the power of his mind, anybody can bend a spoon if they're strong enough, they would look into the science, look into the situations in which he claimed to do that, and debunk it. Around about 1970, when I was 10 years old, Erich von Däniken, who was the Swiss hotelier, he was a hotel manager, who wrote what turned out to be a breakout runaway bestseller called Chariots of the Gods, that made quite spurious cases that ancient astronauts had been responsible for almost every technological achievement of ancient times, and that they had repeatedly visited Earth, and the plains of Nazca were in fact carved into the rocks there to signal aliens to come back and so forth. So they seriously said, what's the claim? And we would look at it. But as I was moving along in my own journey, I found that they had stopped looking skeptically at things and had simply assumed in advance that they knew the answer. The rhetoric that was coming out of first the Skeptical Inquirer, then the first of the famous new atheists, Richard Dawkins most famously, but Martin Shermer and others, Christopher Hitchens, was so dismissively arrogant that if you changed the nouns in their sentences, you could not tell the difference between what they were saying and what fundamentalist religious people were saying. And it really was bothering me that what had started out as saying, no, we're the community of science, we're the community of open minds and rational speculation, had become incredibly dogmatic and closed-minded. And it's still the Skeptical Inquirer and the Skeptic, Michael Shermer's magazine, still famously now are sneeringly arrogant rather than actually questioning about whether there are things that we haven't yet found out about. So that really got me going. And then in the, I guess, 80s, two of the most famous atheists in the world, both of whom were scientists of very different types, Carl Sagan, an astronomer, and Stephen Jay Gould, a paleontologist, both had their lives cut short by terminal diseases, and had famously been, provocatively in the public eye as atheists at a time when that was not particularly an acceptable public position. And I had to wonder if on their deathbeds they had any wavering in their public position and what they'd been thinking about for all this time, or saying for all this time. And certainly their camps, the people around them said, no, there was no, second guessing or wondering if they'd made the wrong side of Pascal's wager being the one that says, if I don't believe in God and God exists, I risk eternal damnation. If I do believe in God and he doesn't exist, I've been nicer to some people than maybe otherwise would have been. So the safe bet is to believe in God, said Pascal, because the downside of not, if he is a vengeful God who punishes non-believers, is way worse than the downside of believing when there is no God. Anyway, so all these questions fascinated me, but particularly I was pissed off by the arrogance of my own community that had adopted the same rhetorical tricks in the late, I guess in the late 90s, early to mid 90s, there started to be a movement called intelligent design. And it said, let's take Darwin at his word. Darwin said in his book, The Origin of Species, if it could be shown that any biologically sophisticated life form came into existence other than through a series of small gradual steps, any life form or any complex biological process came into existence other than through a series of small gradual steps, each of which had to have survival value on its own, then my theory would be shown to be wanting. That's what science is supposed to do. Here's how, Karl Popper, the great philosopher of science, said, if it ain't falsifiable, it ain't in principle, it ain't science. If there aren't conditions in which my hypothesis can be disproven, then it's not potentially science, right? Now, if it passes all the tests, then it ever more provisionally, ever less provisionally, ever more with more assurance around it, we start to say it's almost certainly true. But I mean, everybody would have said Newtonian physics was a complete model of physics until we discovered quantum physics, right? So there's more. Science is always provisional. So some biologists took up the religiously inclined biologists took up the challenge and started writing some very interesting books and papers about intelligent design. The response of the Skeptical Inquirer and the Dawkinses and the Sherwins of the world was not was not to engage with the argument, but was to rebrand the argument and call intelligent design creationism. So they conflated it with with young Earth creationism, which is easily disprovable. We know the universe isn't 4,000 years or 6,000 years old, 4004 BC. This putative Bishop Ussher calculated the putative date of the creation. We know that's not true. We have all kinds of overwhelming evidence that the universe is something like 13.8 billion years old. But instead of engaging with the arguments, no, this, they said, is just a wolf in sheep's clothing. It's just a new name for what we've already dismissed, and we don't have to debate it. And I thought that was intellectually bankrupt. When somebody like Darwin says, here's the falsifiability of my theory. If you can falsify it, here's how you'll do it, which any good theorist has to say. Here's how you can show that string theory is wrong. Here's how you can show that the Hubble constant is incorrect. Here's how you can show it. This is what you would have to prove to the contrary of what my theory states. And some people who had PhDs, who were well-educated, took up the gauntlet, and the skeptical community refused to even look at the evidence. Now, some of the things that they put forward were very, very interesting. And in the decades since, some people have actually tried to debunk them on the basis of faults in the science, which is what should have been happening all along. But I was so angry at the atheist community, so angry at Dawkins and Michael Shermer and the others who wouldn't even engage when somebody said, okay, I'm going to take Darwin at his word and try and show that descent through gradual modification is not, in fact, the be-all and end-all of how life got here. Now, I happen to think it is the be-all and end-all, but the intellectual dishonesty of my own community is what propelled me to write a novel where a character who, like Stephen Jay Gould and like Carl Sagan, found that his life was going to be cut short. In the case of my novel, it was lung cancer. Was confronted by somebody who was as bright and intelligent and well-read as he himself was, but had an opposite conclusion. And this is the thing that I find about my own community, the atheist community. The default assumption is that anybody who believes in God is a benighted fool and an idiot and hasn't read Darwin and hasn't read cosmology. In fact, I know an enormous number of theists and deists who are extremely well-read, but the idea that my community just knocks down straw men instead of actually engaging with those who intelligently disagree felt like perfect fodder for a science fiction novel. Now, your second question was, do I think aliens are likely to be theists or deists or atheists? My suspicion, but it's only a suspicion, and it may be a chauvinism on my part, is that they'll likely be atheists. But on the other hand, if you look at the 8 billion human beings on this planet, 6 billion are religious, 6.5 billion maybe, or more have some sort of belief that would be contrary to the atheist credo. So even here, in the technologically advanced 21st century, most human beings believe in a created universe. And in the United States, as you know, Jeff, what's his name? Jeff Daniels, the star of The Newsroom, if you go on YouTube and see the famous Why America Isn't the Greatest Country in the World video from that Aaron Sorkin TV production, says, you know, there are only 3 things the United States actually is #1 in the world in. And one is the belief in actual angels. It's the country that leads the world, and the number of people, another one is the number of people incarcerated, and the third one, I forget what the third one was, but it was also pretty damning. So, do I believe aliens will likely be atheists? Yeah, because I like to think that I'm on the right path myself, but we ain't anywhere near done with science. And I know I'm on a bit of a rant and a roll here, but we got some hours, so why not? If I say to you, hey, I think we live in a created universe. I think a God, a supreme being, created all of this with some divine plan in mind. You say you're a benighted fool, you're an idiot. If I'm Stephen Hawking and say, in Stephen Hawking's voice, I think we live in a computer simulation, that at some point in the future, being so fantastically advanced, we'll be able to simulate reality with such fidelity, I'll stop the accent, with such fidelity that we can't tell it apart from reality, and that they will indeed create millions and billions of simulations that are as real seeming as everything we see around us. And if there's only one reality and billions of simulations, then the odds say, pure random chance, we're in a simulation. Well, who created the simulation? A vastly advanced high school student in the far future? A vastly advanced AI in the far future? It's just different nouns surrounding the same thing. But if Hawking says up and says it's an AI-generated or an advanced life-form-generated simulation, we go, ooh, science, very cool. Hey, maybe an Elon Musk signed on too. Maybe we are in a simulation. If a religious person says, oh, but we'll call that simulator God, then you say, oh, no, it can't possibly be the case. So even those of us who profess to have a scientific mindset are completely prejudiced in our response depending on what nouns are used to frame the question. And that's my answer.
That's an absolutely amazing answer.
Thank you.
Any of you guys want to do a question? Or you can go, you want to go as well?
So do we really have more than 3 participants here? I hope we do.
We have, yeah, everyone's kind of pouring in. It's Thanksgiving.
All right. Hi there. All right. Very good. Because all I see is that one guy on my right, the far left there. Now you've tipped it. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, that's me. That's,
all right, and you're Adam, right?
Yes, I'm Adam. I'm your biggest fan, probably.
Well, that's nice to hear.
Do you want to go? Do you want to ask a question?
Oh, I don't know. I just joined on.
Oh, okay. Do you guys mind if I ask another question here? Okay. So, by the way, I have like 10 questions here, and like 3 of them were answered during your speech here. So but I do want to address them a bit. In your novels, Eternal Experiment and Calculating God, as well as your latest novel, The Downloaded, you wrestle with themes on simulation and the nature of creator and creation. Taking these themes into account, what is your personal take on simulation theory? The idea that perhaps the universe we currently reside in is a simulation. Do you think it's likely, yes or no, and given other considerations, as in you argue in The Downloaded, whether or not people would even want to?
Right, exactly. So I think that this is reality. I'm a huge fan of the original Star Trek, and Spock once had to say to somebody, Zarabeth, in the penultimate episode of the original Star Trek, All Our Yesterdays, when she said that Spock must be a fantasy, that she's losing her mind, he shook her and said, I'm convinced that I exist. I am real. And I think it's, it's a fun idea to say, we're all simulated. But I keep waiting for the glitch in the matrix, the evidence that, in fact, we do live in a simulation. Now, one could say that certain political events or certain other things sort of say, there's no way this really could have happened. But more than likely, it seems to me that this is the base reality. And as I argue in The Download, I know not everybody here has listened to The Downloaded yet. It's on Audible right now with Academy Award winner Brendan Fraser doing the lead narration. But this notion that we're going to profligately want to simulate numbers of reality. Remember, if there's only one reality and one simulation, it's a coin toss, 50-50. You're either in the reality or you're in the simulation. The only argument that compels people, I think simplistically, to believe that we are in a simulation is the one that Hawking said, which is there are billions of simulations, and obviously definitionally only one reality, then chances are, it'd be 1 in a billion if there are a billion simulations that you're in the one that's real. But if there's, the chances are way better. Not that you're in any specific simulation, but you're 1 of the billion that exists. But would we ever want to simulate worlds in this level of fidelity? And that's based, I think, on, as I say in the download, on a paradigm. The current paradigm, and it's hugely explored, by the way, in science fiction, very much associated with the science fiction genre, is that history could have been different than it was. And that small changes could have had big, interesting consequences. And the famous examples, obviously, is the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand started in World War I, the rise of a madman, Adolf Hitler, essentially started in World War II, that if these individuals, either one had been assassinated, the other one had come to power, the world would be a completely different place. Wouldn't that be fascinating to play around with different scenarios? And all of that is based on a fundamental assumption that the past could have been different than it was. And comes back to a very Newtonian notion. Before we had quantum theory and chaos theory, Newton had his clockwork universe that basically, if you wound it all up, it would unwind the same way every time. That the trajectories of every particle is bouncing off every other particle. Theory could be calculated. That the past could be any number, couldn't be anything other than what it was. We have this tendency to think, well, the argument that the past could be different is simply this, that it's now 21 minutes into this session, and I could have forgotten, right? Now, Adam, you sent me a note 20 minutes before it began, but I could have been out, completely forgotten, lost track of time, and not showed up. So clearly, the last 21 minutes we think could have been different. But then you can make that argument about the last 41 minutes, the last 41 years, the last 4.5 million years. Could they be different? Are they contingent? A lot of physicists, and I think it will become the prevailing paradigm as time goes on, think that we live in what is called a locked universe, associated with a physicist named Minkowski, that simply says that what we call now is illusory. This just happens to be the moment that we're contemplating at the moment, but at this instant, but 65 million years ago, 66 million years ago, when the asteroid hit off the Yucatan and wiped out the dinosaurs, that's fixed in time. 66 million years in the future is just as fixed. We just haven't illuminated that moment yet. And I think there's more and more compelling physical argument for that. And we have right now a couple of very interesting books by Robert Sapolsky that just came out that says, we don't have any free will. There's more and more biochemical, biological, evolutionary, philosophical, and physics evidence that we don't have free will, that the past was inevitably what it was going to be, and the future is already as written in stone as the past was. Now, if that does become the prevailing intellectual paradigm, then the idea of, we'll simulate all these versions of how it could have gone differently falls by the wayside. If it couldn't have been different, what's the point of simulating something that could not possibly have been? So I don't know that we're ever going to simulate all these worlds, or why we or anyone would want to. We play Minecraft, we play Sim City and The Sims and things like that. We had for a while a thing called Second Life, which still, I think, limps along. Mark Zuckerberg bet the farm that everybody wanted to get into the metaverse. He was the founder of Facebook, even renamed the parent company Meta. And it turned out nobody really wanted that. Nobody really actually seems to want this level of simulation as their primary existence. And for the interesting questions that one might ask about history, do you really need to simulate the California State University Fresno Science Fiction Club meeting? You don't. It has no impact. No matter how much you want to believe in butterflies, the butterfly effect, and chaos theory, the existence of you, me, us right now will have negligible ripples that will ever make an impact on the question of whether or not the war in Ukraine ends, on whether Hamas releases the hostages this week or not. None of that will be affected by this. And yet we're postulating that some future simulator decided to simulate all this, decided to simulate a guy with red shoes walking across the room right now in the background, as he just did here. I mean, who would simulate a detail like that as an irrelevance? So I'm not at all a fan of the, I think there might be a multiverse, I think there might be parallel universes and so forth, but there's simulations created for the purpose of exploring alternate versions of history. I think that's a non-starter. It's going to be a narrow academic interest for a few decades and not be something that civilizations will devote enormous resources to.
That's interesting. That's another awesome answer. Do you want to ask a question, by the way?
I was actually going to come see what.
Oh, okay. So we kind of asked a bunch of really deep questions here. I want to kind of take a step back. For 4 years, from 96, 97, 98, 99, you were nominated for a Hugo Award. What was that like? You eventually.
I mean, I've been nominated 13 times, but yeah.
But there's a good stretch where it was like every year you're hitting it hard.
Yeah.
What was that like? What's the process to getting nominated, building up the following? Was it between you and a publisher? Was it any interesting details surrounding it?
So that's very interesting the way you phrase that, Adam, because today that is so much how awards are done. People hustle for awards. Studios spend an enormous amount of time advertising and promoting their works to, say, the Academy members to try and get Academy Award nominations for their work. The Hugos are given by science fiction readers. And although today we have this kind of interactivity where I can actually be talking to some of my readers or potential readers there in Fresno from here in Toronto, in the 90s, we didn't have Zoom, we didn't have video conferencing, we didn't have much in the way of the kind of online communities or interactivity or accessibility. Authors were not particularly accessible to their readers. So you won your awards the old-fashioned way. You wrote the best damn thing you could while others were doing the same thing. They were put out in traditional publishing in books, and readers found them or didn't find them and liked them or didn't like them. And they, in their individual private wisdom, without any arm twisting, decided what they wanted to nominate and ultimately what they wanted to vote for. Today, you know, there are these, I remember a ridiculous thing that happened in Toronto some years ago. The CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, had its Bookie Awards. And you could vote in the Bookie Awards as many times as you wanted to. And you could get all your friends to vote as many times as they wanted to. And somehow, at the end of this, who was the crassest, who was the most desperate for attention, ugly spectacle, a winner would emerge. As that happened, there was a short list for the bookies, and I had a novel on it. One of my Wake, Watch, and Wonder, my trilogy, and the main character's name was Caitlin. And there was a writer in Toronto whose wife's name was Caitlin, and he decided to organize the Battle of the Caitlins to make sure that his wife won the award. Well, his wife did win the award by an enormous amount because of an enormous amount of hustling to get multiple votes. Makes the award absolutely meaningless. What meant a lot to me for those Hugo Awards was that fans that I had no way to influence whatsoever except by the hopefully brilliance of my prose decided that they wanted to honor my work. And those 4 years you happen to mention, I lost all 4 of those years. I did win, I've been nominated 13 times. I've won once. It was 2003, 20 years ago, that I won my Hugo. But there was nothing I could do to manipulate the process except write well. And the only awards that matter, whether they're academic awards, whether they're writing awards, whether they're acting awards, are the ones that is the only criteria. You do your best work, hands off, the audience decides whether or not they want to honor that work.
Do you feel now that things have somewhat changed, that it's required now to hustle, or do you think a good old-fashioned writing a really good book could still win?
Yeah, it's absolutely changed. It's a hustling game right now. With all due respect to some friends of mine who they just the Calgary Herald is the newspaper in Calgary, Alberta, the capital of the province of Alberta. And on Saturday, so just we have our big weekend papers on Saturday, not Sunday, like in the States. If anybody has papers anymore at all. So on Saturday, that sellers list was published, and a person who had a micro, practically self-published book hit #1 and #5 on the list, and one of her friends was also on the list in the top 10. Why? Because it turns out that there's one bookstore that provides the data to that bestsellers list. And if you go in that week and do an actual signing and you sell 20 copies or 30 copies, you're the bestseller that week. After that, your book sells 0 copies for the 51 weeks of the year. We have so many micro categories on Amazon that it's almost ridiculous that any book isn't a #1 bestseller for at least and they update those categories hourly. So everybody is a bestseller these days, even if they've only sold 25 books. Everybody is out there hustling and pushing, and it's not something that I have ever enjoyed. It's funny, people used to say, oh, Sawyer is a master of self-promotion. No, I just showed up and gave good sound bites when people asked me questions. But the hucksterism that's become a core part of the writer's life these days is frankly quite a turn-off to me. And I see writers who spend most of their time hustling and very little time writing ambitious work. And it's really, really to the detriment of the art form of my field, science fiction, and just publishing in general. There was an article in the Atlantic quite recently, I think it was the Atlantic, it might have been New York, I think it was the Atlantic, about how Amazon has changed the face of literature. It totally has, because now that everybody can publish, that means everybody can publish, whether they're any good or not, whether they worked for years on their work or whether they worked for hours on their work. And it has really lowered the standard of literature. That's my rant.
Okay, another question here, kind of on a little bit connected with this, is by the way, this is being recorded. If you want me to remove the part about Amazon, because I know you have a deal with Audible, I totally can. But I just want to let you know if that's okay.
I know you're recording.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. In your latest novel, The Downloaded, it's structured into 10 episodes of equal length, roughly 30 minutes, and it's very dialogue heavy and depicts powerful descriptive scenes. Given the nature of the novel, are there plans in the near future to adapt The Downloaded into a television show or a movie? What gave inspiration to structure the novel in an episodic format?
So originally Audible approached me and said, we would like to be in business with you. And what we've got in mind is an original thing that you would write. That would probably be like a serialized radio drama. And so it would be 10.5-hour episodes. And we had this idea, and we came to financial terms that I would do it, very handsome financial terms. And then COVID-19 hit. And the producers of Audible said, uh-oh, we don't think because of COVID-19 protocols that we can get more than one person into a recording studio at a time. So the idea of doing fully dramatized scenes became a logistical difficulty. And I frankly didn't know what we were going to do at that point. How are we going to make this thing work? But they'd already brought aboard a producer, director who I'd worked with in the past. His name is Gregory Sinclair. He used to be one of the producers of radio drama for the CBC, the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, or National Broadcasting Service, back when they had radio drama. And we had actually done a radio drama collaboration with another writer for him 15 years ago or more. Anyway, so he came along and said one word to me that changed everything. That word was Rashomon. And Rashomon is the title of a an Akira Kurosawa, very famous Japanese film from half a century or more ago, based on a couple of short stories by a Japanese writer. But the shtick, even if you've never seen Rashomon, you've seen things that have copied its shtick. Its shtick is a whole series of characters recounting parts of the story as they either saw it or choose to present it, sometimes lying when they present it, to make themselves look good or shade the meaning of the thing the way they wanted it shaded. And Greg Sinclair, the producer, said, Rashomon to me. I thought, yeah, that's it. That's the way to do this. So we ended up structuring it with 9 different first-person narrators, 3 major ones and 6 minor ones, who would recount parts of the story from their point of view. And that, it turned out, worked really, really well. But it never would have been the way I would have done it if it hadn't been that originally Audible wanted to do it as a serialized 10-part thing. They dropped that idea after I finished writing. They said, let's just do it as one continuous, big, long thing. And B, this constraint of actors in the studio, only one at a time. And then after the fact, when all the recording was done, or as we're getting near to getting it done, I guess, Greg said, hey, I'm going to splice all the parts together and make it try to play as if we got the actors in the studio. And in a large measure, it worked. There's some glitches in it that didn't work. But in large measure, it did work that way. As for the future of the property, well, it is coming out in book and ebook form on May 7th next year, 2024, because I retained those rights in the contract. Also retained film and TV rights, but contracts are very complex for any intellectual property. So Amazon owns Audible. And so Audible had a provision in my contract that we first have to show the project to an Audible affiliate, meaning Amazon Studios. And in fact, my managers, who also are George R.R. Martin's managers, the same people who set up the Game of Thrones TV series and previously, you guys are too young to remember, flash forward my series on ABC in 2009, 2010, are now working on presenting the project to Amazon Studios, because we contractually have to show it to them first. If they have 45 days to say whether they want to develop it or not, if they don't, then we're free to develop it with somebody else. But nonetheless, if we do develop with somebody else, these things are complex. Audible gets 5% of the revenue that we generate from this as kind of their piece of the back end for having launched the project in the first place. And Hollywood contracts are always like that. How much of a piece of somebody else's property can you carve out for yourself? So that's what's going on. We certainly hope, and I would love, it's so hard to get an Academy Award-winning actor to read anything. And the fact that Brendan Fraser has already read and loved the downloaded and agreed to do it. I would love to see him agree to be associated with what we hope will be the eventual television adaptation. But he hasn't, he's not attached to that yet.
Yeah, I read or I listened to the downloaded, and I felt like Brendan Fraser's character was specifically written for him. It was really good. I loved it.
Brendan was great, but I wrote the character, and then the producer and I sat down. Because Audible was 100% supportive and wonderful, more so than anybody else I've ever dealt with, I have to say, in terms of allowing us creative freedom and creative input into all aspects of it. So they said to Greg and me, who do you have in mind? And I just got to scratch my head. And Greg was the one, after I read the part, it wasn't written for him, but I said, Brendan Fraser. And I thought, oh my God, that's right, that's perfect. But then, in January of this year, 2023, Brendan did the unseemly and won the Academy Award for Best Actor, Best Lead Actor for his performance in The Whale. And Greg and I said after that, well, that's it. We're done. Don't worry about it. Brendan Fraser because he was already being paid millions a picture, but his price went way up the moment he won the Academy Award. But Audible said, if that's who you want, that's who we'll get. And oh my God, it took months of negotiation and then months more to find a hole in Brendan's schedule when he could do it. But lo and behold, they went and they got him. So yeah, he's perfect for the part. It wasn't written for him, but he inhabited the role so well when he performed it that it seems as if no one else, can't imagine anybody else but Brendan Fraser being Roscoe Cadouli at this point.
Well, if you ever need any extras for your show, I'm sure the Science Fiction Club would love to drive down there and do whatever.
Oh, I'm sure they would. Yeah, and I had a hard time when Flash Forward was on ABC. Our showrunner was David Goyer. He's directed the pilot, and Dave actually is the showrunner on Apple's, I think it's Apple's Foundation series, adapting Isaac Asimov's novels right now. Anyways, Dave wasn't even going to give me a little walk-on part in the pilot. But the head of the studio representative from ABC Studios was there, and she actually turned to him and said, put Sawyer in a scene to look good on the DVD extra features. So, so I got squeezed in for a few seconds of airtime. But although writers have a lot to say over the script, we have almost no say over casting, which is why it was astonishing that Audible even asked me who I thought should play the parts. It never happens in film and television that the scriptwriter gets consulted.
Yeah, I have to ask this about the downloaded. What was up with the Martian introducing himself? Yeah, I think the quote he says is, how about that meteor striking Earth and killing everyone, or something like that?
Yeah.
What made you
choose
that
pending asteroid attack, eh?
What made you choose that as like the introduction of? Because it's such a, everything's building up. There's all this tension. There's chaos, and then there's just this strange comedic line. Why did you choose that? What was that about?
Well, I mean, it was exactly that, right? And then that's a cliffhanger at the end of what would have been one of the chapters, right? If it had dropped in one of the episodes, if it had dropped as 10 parts, that's the end of episode 9, I think, episode 8, can't remember. But I just loved that notion that this Martian, and in fact, in the first draft, Martian finally gets asked what his name is, and he says, Howard. I thought that was a really cool name for a Martian. Howard the Martian. But I thought, I ended up giving him, actually I gave him the name Ray Was. And I thought, that's a good name. Nobody will catch that. It's my name spelled backwards, Sawyer. And then Greg, the producer, said, I saw what you did there. So I changed it to Ray Want from Ray Was. But I just loved the notion that I love turning tropes on their head. And the standard trope when an alien arrives, going, take me to your leader, or we are here to invade, or force peace upon you, or whatever. And I wanted, there's a running theme through the whole of the download of characters doing stand-up comedy. It's particularly Jürgen Haas, who keeps saying, thank you, I'm here all millennium, right? Don't forget to tip your robot, right? And I kind of liked the idea that he would be trumped with a stand-up comedy entrance by the Martian, who everybody was kind of in awe of to that point. So it just tickled my fancy to do it that way. And the actor that we got to do the Martian, Colm Feore, who is in Canada is just a legend. He's one of our top theater actors and also television film actor, but just knew exactly the right nuance to bring to it. So yeah. It just it tickled me that instead of, and then a little later, Jamila, the British cosmologist, Jamila Chowdhury, says, I admire your restraint in not showing up and saying, "Behold, I am the Archangel Gabriel," which is actually not only a funny line in and of itself, I think, but also a callback to the original Star Trek. Dr. McCoy says that once when they beam down. In an episode called Bread and Circuses, he says, just once, I would like to beam on down into a primitive society and say, behold, I'm the Archangel Gabriel. I just, I'd like to think that no matter how, and this is true in calculating God too, by the way, no matter how advanced aliens are, the real signature of being an advanced being is not super technology and is not incredibly complex thought processes. It's having a really good sense of humor. And I do that all the time with Hollis in Calculating God and with Raymond the Martian in the download.
So do any of you guys want to? I feel so bad that I'm taking up all these questions. Does anyone want to say anything? Anyone want to look at anything so far? Still speechless and shut. Go ahead.
I guess I have a general writing question.
Sure.
Do you know like how the story's going to end, or do you kind of just go along with the flow? Whatever?
So we have in the writing viz, we have two camps. We call them pantsers and plotters. Pantsers are people who fly by the seat of their pants. They don't know how it's going to end. One of the great stylists in science fiction was writer named Gene Wolfe, with an E at the end. Gene, the man, G-E-N-E, and Wolfe, W-O-L-F-E. We had the same editor for books for many years, David Hartwell. And Gene famously would just sit and start writing and see where it goes. And there are other writers who meticulously outline everything, every nuance, every beat, every character moment before they actually start writing the prose. When I teach creative writing, I always say, and it is true, that it is ultimately easier and more economical of your time to plot everything out in advance. That said, I'm not very good at doing that. For me, I discover the most interesting things while I'm writing, in the little character bits that become apparent when you have to put two characters together. I'll give an example, Calculating God. When I was writing Calculating God, all I was interested in was the idea of an atheistic human scientist meeting a theistic alien scientist. And I had them having some really, I thought, interesting philosophical conversations. But I'd written probably a quarter of the book before I said to myself, it's too dry. There's no real stakes here other than who's going to win the philosophical argument. And that's when I gave and went back and put it on page 1. The main human character, the fatal cancer diagnosis. Because then suddenly the stakes of whether or not a creator exists, whether or not there's a meaningful life, whether or not maybe there's an afterlife, became high for them. They weren't abstract, they were real and concrete. And for me, if I thought about plotting the book out, I probably should have seen that necessity, dramatic necessity in advance of writing word one. But it didn't occur to me until I was partway through the book, a good hunk of the way through the book. And then I came back and revised what I had written to make it seem like it had been there organically from the beginning. So, part of the problem with being a professional writer is the more track record you have, the less it takes to get a contract for something you haven't written. So in fact, for the downloading, the original contract, basically Audible was, we want you to do something for us. And we had like these incredibly broad strokes, 10, 30-minute episodes. And that was it. And they gave me a giant contract without even an idea of what it was that I was going to write for that contract. Early in your career, nobody will give you a contract for a book based on an idea or even an outline of at least a novel. It might be nonfiction, but for a novel, you're going to say, no, finish it. Show us the whole completed work. Because we don't believe you can pull it off. Everybody says they can write a book. Very few actually can. So early in your career, you're sort of forced by market necessity, if you're going to work with traditional publishers, to do a lot of outlining to show them what it is that they're buying. If you want a contract to write something that you haven't finished writing. As you go farther along, it's like, this is the time I did another book. Yeah, okay. Here's a contract. Let us know when it's done. Which disincentivizes the creation of the outline at the beginning. So I always say the answer to your question is, if you can work it out in advance, so much the better. I'll give you a perfect example. I don't know if you've listened, the gentleman who asked the question to the downloaded yet. But in the downloaded, there's a murder mystery. Because there are these astronauts who've been cryogenically frozen. And when they thaw out, the doctor and the ship's captain were looking at the other cryogenic chambers where the rest of their crew should be. One of them has been smashed open, and the skull of the person within has been caved in. Now, if you're writing a mystery, you should know who did it. And then write backwards from that. I had no idea when I wrote that as I was drafting this, why or how or who. And I was forced to think on my feet as I was developing it. I won't spoil it for those who haven't listened to or eventually are going to read the downloaded, what the solution is. But organically, it all fits because of the rewriting, the revision I did once I finally worked it out. But all I knew was that a really good murder mystery at that point in the plot would propel the plot forward, and I had faith in myself that I would figure out a good solution to the mystery that I myself had created.
Thank you.
Wow, that's interesting. So, what would your advice be to a first-time author who's like, say, halfway through their first book, and even from your own experience writing your first book?
I got the first half here. What's your advice to an author who's maybe halfway through his first book, or their first book, and then I missed the rest of what you said?
Oh, I just said, like, or what was your experience writing your first ever book?
Oh, sure. Okay. Well, as I said, there are two routes now that are very different when I started out. My first book came out in 1990, 33 years ago. In fact, 33 years ago, this month I got my first copy of it. Then the only option was traditional publishing, right? Which meant you had to have a completed manuscript and show it around to publishers and hope one of them would want to buy it. And certainly, the bottom line is you've got to finish it. So many people, when they start writing, realize there's something wrong and their book isn't working out, or their short story isn't working out, and they abandon it. And I liken learning the craft of writing to learning to be a carpenter. If your job was to make a table, and you got partway through, there's something wrong with this table, I don't know what it is, I give up. And you'll start making another table. And this one isn't turning out either, I don't know why. You keep making tables that'll never work. If you finish a table, and then you realize, oh, it's wobbly. I should have made all the legs the same length. I've learned something. By finishing it, pushing through the end, and seeing why it doesn't work, is way better than that feeling that it's not going to come together. The hardest thing is pushing through to the end. And you just got to do it. And even if it means at the end you realize, oh, this was a failed experiment. There's an arrogance about young writers, and I was amongst those young writers once upon a time. We are the only artists, writers, who feel that our first efforts should be put out in front of the public. Nobody practicing to being a rock musician in their garage feels that they should release that first album of the recordings of their garage style. No painter feels that the first time they put brush to canvas that a gallery should exhibit their work. But writers think, oh my God, the first thing I've written should be published, and the whole world should hail me as a genius. For most writers, their early efforts should be learning efforts, learning exercises, as they develop the skill to write something that's really publishable. That said, I did sell my first novel. The first novel I wrote did sell, but it sold as my fifth book after I'd sold 4 others, and had gone back and revised that first book to make it, get it up to a publishable standard. So my advice is, I'm going to give you, in fact, a quick little lesson here. Robert A. Heinlein was, for many decades, considered the preeminent American science fiction writer, which means the preeminent science fiction writer in the entire world. And he had 5 rules of writing. If you go to my website is sfwriter.com. S is in science, F is in fiction, writer.com. If you go there and click on how to write, you will find Heinlein's rules under how to write, and I'll tell you what they are. There are 5 of them. And the first one is, and it's amazing, and he said, I'm going to give away the 5 rules. These are the 5 secrets. If you follow them, you become my competition. You might outsell me, you might squeeze me out of the marketplace. But I know you're not going to follow them. So I will give them to you freely, because almost nobody that I share this with will actually do it. And he's absolutely right about this. The 5 rules are, 1, you must write. Most people who think they want to be writers never get around to sitting down in front of the word processor and pounding the keys. 2, and this is where you are, my friend, you must finish what you start. Because the number of abandoned projects out there far exceeds the number of published projects out there. You must finish what you start. And then Heinlein was a big believer in not revising unless somebody who was prepared to buy it said you should make these changes. So he said you should refrain from rewriting except to editorial order. Gets in a lot of trouble with creative writing teachers and lots of other writers over that. But the bottom line is really just can't fiddle endlessly with the same work. Right? You must write, you must finish it, and revise as long as you think it's getting better. If it's just different after a day's revision, you're done. It's a famous story about Oscar Wilde, who used to live in a rooming house. And he came down for lunch one day at the rooming house, and one of his fellow boarders in the house said, "Wilde, how was your morning?" And he said, "It was wonderful. I took out a comma." And then he came down 5 hours later for dinner, and his flatmate said, "Wilde, how'd the afternoon go?" He said, "It was brilliant. I put that comma back in." At that point, you're done. You're just changing, and it's different, but not better. So number 3 is, once you stop making, when you yourself say, "Oh, it's just different, it's not better," stop. Number 4, you must put it on the market. Now that either means sending it to a magazine or a book publisher that might buy it, or these days, actually putting it on, self-publishing, getting it out there. If you just put it out there and get it out there, then the readers will tell you immediately, either by buying it or not buying it, or giving you good reviews or giving lousy reviews, whether you did a good job. But back in Heinlein's day, that was not an option. Self-publishing. Put it on the market, and then you'll probably get rejected. Almost everything gets rejected. This is the hardest thing. I was at this writing retreat, as I said at the beginning, this past weekend. One of the writers there I first met when I was teaching a writing class for that same group of writers in 1996. It's a long time ago. She hasn't published anything yet. She was in my class then, and she was still there at this writing retreat, still writing stuff. Never sends it out. Never tries to get it published. Why? Because as long as she's only showing it to her significant other, to her friends, to her little critique circle, she can hear all the praise in the world about it and believe that it's brilliant, until it's put in front of a dispassionate person who has no vested interest in making you happy, but only is trying to decide how to wisely spend the publisher's money. Do you really find out whether you're any good or not? So it's a huge stumbling block, number 4. Put it on the market, and you'll almost certainly be rejected, even if it's really good, just because, we just published. I had my first novel, and then there I tried to sell serialization rights to a science fiction magazine, Analog, the world's #1 best-selling English language science fiction magazine. And the editor said, "I love this, but I just did a time-travel dinosaur story. I can't find this." You can be rejected for any number of reasons that have nothing to do with the quality of your work. So Heinlein's final rule is keep it on the market. Just keep sending it out over and over again to different places until it sells. And if you follow those 5 rules, which as I say, almost nobody ever does, they stumble at it, they never get around to writing. They never finish the damn thing. They keep fiddling with it endlessly. They're so chicken shit that they never are willing to show it to anybody who might pass a dispassionate judgment on it. And they're so discouraged the first time they're rejected, they just give up and never try again. That's the life history of almost all people who claim to want to be writers. The tiny fraction who may get it, like I did, and others, are the ones who follow all 5 of those rules.
Thank you.
Doctor, I also noticed, and you mentioned this earlier, you said that you added Dr. Jericho's illness, lung cancer, to kind of make these more tangible, abstract questions, also to motivate him in doing this. But I noticed that in a lot of your novels, probably in almost all of them, there's always a character suffering from terminal illness. I believe in Frame Shift, it's Hodgkin's lymphoma. In The Downloaded, it's not the main protagonist, but another character. It begins with her in the hospital, and then lung cancer. What's your inspiration for choosing these illnesses? Is something personal, or is it just for that motivation factor?
So when I started, it was absolutely just appropriate for the drama. In Frame Shift, which is a novel about in the age of predictive genetic testing, the only thing that makes sense is socialized medicine, a lesson Americans have yet to learn. The Canadians learned half a century ago, most of the rest of the world learned, the developed world. Having a fatal disease that hasn't manifested itself in any symptoms, such as Huntington's disease, which I can absolutely determine whether or not you have it by looking at your genes for stuttering repeat of a series of codons on a specific chromosome. You got it. At some point it will manifest. Right now you're perfectly healthy, except for looking at your genes. There's nothing that indicates that you have this debilitating disease. You got it. So I ain't going to insure you is the reality right now in predictive genetic testing. And at the time I wrote Frame Shift, the Human Genome Project was still underway at the dawn of this era where we were going to be able to point to things in our genes, such as you're going to have a heart attack, you're going to have Alzheimer's, you're going to have diabetes. They're not any of those things yet, but they're in your genes, they're unavoidable. So yeah, it did come up repeatedly. And then when I wrote Calculating God in the year 2000, well, it came out in 2000, so we're in 1999. It's 99, I didn't know anybody personally who ever had lung cancer. And then some years later, my younger brother got lung cancer, and he died of lung cancer at the age of 51. He's been dead 10 years now. And that kind of drove it home. And I don't talk about this publicly very much, but I have a cancer diagnosis myself. I have mantle cell lymphoma, which is an incurable form of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I went through very extensive chemotherapy. I was bald before it was chemo that did this. Chemotherapy, radiation therapy, and an autologous stem cell transplant to try to beat back this cancer, which is caused by a genetic translocation, a flipping of sequence of codons between two of my chromosomes. And it's incurable because it's in the chromosomes. It will come back. It will probably come back within 5 to 7 years from now. And it'll probably kill me when it comes back. So it certainly has colored my understanding, or added more, right? But you know, is what I always say, writers. Well, I wish I didn't know this as intimately as I do, what it's like to have a life-threatening and probably terminal diagnosis. But I never anticipated living that aspect of my character's life. It was just dramatically appropriate in each of those individual stories that somebody be dealing with an illness. So if you've listened to the download, and I know you had, Captain Letitia Garvey's father, who at the opening of the novel is frozen because they're hoping for a cure for mantle cell lymphoma. Well, he's got the cancer that I have, and I was writing very much from personal experience.
Have you thought about freezing yourself then? Is that...
No, I have zero interest. It's funny you should say that, because that's what he does in the novel. Yeah. And there's a great American science fiction writer named Gregory Benford, who was, he's in his 80s, so he's 20 years older than me. But a good friend of mine, And he actually had arranged, he's a professor emeritus now, but at UC Irvine, actually, physics professor, but he'd arranged in advance to have himself cryogenically frozen by Alcor, which is the biggest and putatively the best cryonics facility. We say putatively the best. None of these facilities, as I say in the download, has yet succeeded in reanimating somebody they've frozen after death. So we say they're the best because of what? Because they've got pretty grounds and nice people that work there. They've never once proven that they can do what they're charging people a fortune on the promise that they'll be able to do someday.
I don't know if you read, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I don't know if you read that recent article that came out about 3 weeks ago. In the 80s, a lot of people had, like, the first batch had frozen themselves, and it's some smaller company, but it was just released after, like, there was an NDA and contract, that a lot of those who first froze, there was a time when the company, like, there was a blackout, and they thought, and they had to literally scrape the remains off of the bottoms of the
Absolutely.
So I didn't know.
Yeah.
It's very interesting how people would kind of trust a corporation to do something that not only, I don't know if it's scientifically possible, but they've kind of shown they don't have the care to do, you know.
Right.
Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, so to me, exactly, right. So to me, it's an act of desperation. It's interesting, you know, we cast Brendan Fraser to play one of our frozen characters, right, in the download. You guys, again, are probably too young to remember, but Brendan's breakout role was a comedy from 20-odd years ago called Encino Man, where he played a caveman who had been frozen and actually was thawed out in Encino, California. And came to the present day. Of course, he's a freak, right? You know, doesn't fit in, doesn't belong. And this notion, you know, I like Greg Benford a great deal. And he's, you know, he's a rich man, he can do whatever he wants with his money. But the notion that someday down the road, somebody is going to want to thaw him out, and that he will be anything other than an object of curiosity, a freak. You know, suppose it's 100 years from now that they figure out how to cure whatever might eventually kill the rabbit. 100 years ago is 1923, right? The world 100 years ago was so spectacularly different that somebody coming from 1923 would be completely baffled by this Zoom conference that we're having right now, by that plastic container that you and I are drinking out of that, because there were plastics in 2023.
I know you can see
All of it, just completely fish out of water. It's not an existence that I think would be an enjoyable existence. Now, the sad code of all this is just about a year ago, Greg had a massive stroke, and is not recovered from that stroke. So, not when he does pass away, it's not even clear that when they do freeze him, that there's going to be a viable ability to reanimate that brain at any point. It's severely damaged. Veins broke and fire hose into his brain. You know, that's what happens in the stroke. So this is not an abstract question for me, because I do have this very serious diagnosis. But when I look, you know, I think about, well, what would happen if, you know, the cancer might, in theory, on the odds, 5 to 7 years from now, come back and kill me. If I'm lucky, I'll be an outlier. It'll be 10, 20, 30, 40 years before it comes back and kills me. Or by that point, maybe we'll have a cure for this cancer, as I postulated in the download. But suppose it came back tomorrow, and they said, you know, this is, you know, it's over. What would I say? Not taking off the Alcor to freeze my body. I would say, you know what? I lived, forgive me, my American friends there, but I lived in the best place in the entire world. And I lived at the best time in all of history. And I lived already, I'm 63, longer than 95% of all the human beings who've ever gone before me. My life ends tomorrow. I still won the jackpot. And, you know, some looser sense, anybody who lives in a modern Western democracy, living in the best place in the world. And there's never been a time with more affluence, more prosperity, and despite the horrible things happening in the Middle East and in Ukraine right now, more peace than there's ever been in human history than there is today. So, we all did fine. And, you guys are probably all hoping to make it to live to be 100. When I was 7 years old, I lived in Canada, so Canada is a much younger country than the United States. 1967 was our 100th anniversary of the country, 100th anniversary of Confederation. They actually found people who were 100 years old, who were as old as the country, and essentially brought them in their wheelchairs for show and tell to show the kids, which was kind of crazy and nuts stuff. But it was so rare in 1967 for anybody to live to be 100 years old that these guys were free. Now we all hope, I hope that every single one of you is going to live to be 100. We all know people who've got their parents or their grandparents who are 103, 105, 107, some over 110. This is all eminently plausible now, but 63 is a ripe old age by the standards of most of human history. And I got to make it that far. I'm happy about that.
I'm sorry to hear, Doctor, about your health conditions.
Both of my
you
parents
got to stick around.
academics.
You can't give up. I need more books from you.
I'm not giving up, but I will say, just to come briefly back to the socialized medicine thing, because you guys are young and you're voters, and you will have votes that count in the upcoming presidential election that you're going to have next year. I belong, my cancer is very rare. Very rare. Mantle cell lymphoma, about 500 diagnoses in North America every year. It's officially classified as an orphan disease, meaning that there's, or a rare disease, meaning that there's so few people who have it, there's very little effort to try and cure it. It's like not cure, way more important to find cures for breast cancer or prostate cancer than this cancer, just on the sheer numbers. Anyways, I belong to a Facebook group for people who have mantle cell lymphoma, my disease, because the chances of you knowing somebody in your own town who has it is minuscule. So you've got, your support group is scattered all over the world. Well, the saddest thing is seeing the Americans, some of the Americans in the support group saying, everybody says this stem cell transplant, this autologous stem cell transplant, is the best gold standard treatment for staving off death from mantle cell lymphoma for years. But it costs $1 million at an American hospital, $1 million. And my plan doesn't cover it. And so what's the second best choice, or the third best, that maybe my plan might cover? I've had that treatment. I've had 3 weeks in complete isolation ward in the hospital, because once they knock down all your immune system and cancer treatment, any little disease could kill you. I've never seen a bill for anything. And America is the only country in the world where, the only developed country in the world where that is still the case, where if you get a debilitating disease, not tough being, sorry you have to die because of it, but you guys can change that. So when you go to vote, you had the chance repeatedly. You were too young to vote, but you had the chance repeatedly. We had presidential candidates who were promising to bring forward universal health care in the United States, and they were always defeated by people who would rather see Americans die because they couldn't afford the treatment that I got just because it's my human right as a Canadian to be entitled to the very best treatment that science can provide. The cost is immaterial. Make that change. That's my plea. That's what my novel Friendship was about in 1997, pleading for people to realize that allowing big business to decide who lives and who dies is an absolute travesty of a so-called free nation.
So guys, 2 things. We have to vote, and we have to cure this disease. We got
absolutely.
We had 3 up-and-coming biologists in here that could totally do the research on that. Anyways, I do want to talk about. Sorry. By the way, do you guys want to do more questions? I don't want to take this for the.
Yeah.
You guys want? Okay. I want to talk about you in your novel Frame Shift. I don't know how. Wait. Let me think about how I want to word this. In your novel Frame Shift, there's this interesting theory that's posited about the origin of man and different ethnicities. Do you personally believe that this theory is okay? All right. What do you want to say about it? Like, what's your take on it? And
yeah, I was first to say a broad generality. The job of the science fiction writer is not to put forward the most likely explanation for an intriguing phenomenon, but rather the most entertaining or interesting explanation that isn't easily gainsaid or disproven by what we already know. So we spend, we come up with fascinating, interesting ideas that you can't say, well, wait a minute, law of conservation of mass and energy, that can't happen. You can't, it has to follow scientifically. But our job is to find the interesting ones. The frame shift notion, the notion that written already into our DNA are future mutations that are going to come into effect sort of down the road is teleological. It suggests that evolution has a goal, and there are standard dogmas that always anger me as what I like to think of as an open-minded intellectual person. One of the standard dogmas is that evolution has no goal, and it's just stated flat out. It's not teleological. It's not goal-oriented. We don't actually know whether it is or not. We just take that as the dogma, the paradigm that's in effect at this particular historical time period. Same thing with mind-body dualism. Dualism is rejected paradigm. Currently, the idea that consciousness is something separate from the body is relegated to either religious belief or fringe science. But again, we don't know. Since we don't know what consciousness is, to simply flat out state that it, well, obviously, is not separable from the body is another prevailing paradigm that it's fun to say, well, what if that's not the case? So, for instance, the notion of the download is very much a tweak of the nose of those who reject mind-body dualism. It says quite directly, we can freeze the body because that's just Newtonian physics. But for the mind, the consciousness, we have to upload it into a quantum mechanical environment because the mind actually is something separate from the physicality, the Newtonian physicality of the brain. And we don't know if that's true or not. It's more entertaining for the purposes of my book to say that it is something separate. But we simply don't know what consciousness is. So to have a paradigm that says, no, we decided it's this. It is something that arises simply from Newtonian chemical processes in the physical structure of the body is simply by deciding by fiat rather than by any experimental evidence. And so I love playing with those notions. Frame shift and download are both two different paradigms, but just tweaking what the prevailing dogma is. Calculating God as the third. That says, no, any intelligent life form is absolutely going to be an atheist. Well, actually, Pope Francis is a pretty intelligent, well-read life form. He's not an atheist. There are lots of intelligent people who are not atheists. And that's to just dismiss them and say, no, by definition, they must be stupid if they believe in their whatever name they want to give to their superhuman entity up in the sky that looks after them.
Interesting. I know you say that like science fiction authors typically don't believe in what they write, but I don't know if you've ever met Larry Niven, the author of
Larry's an old friend. I know Larry very well.
I feel like that guy 100% believes what he writes, though, because I've seen him at a sci-fi convention, and he's very, very passionate about like virus and gene editing and all that stuff. But I don't mean to like be one of those guys like what's it like, but you say you and Larry Niven are close friends. What's he like? What's it like working with other authors? Also, are there any sci-fi authors that you personally enjoy in your favorite sci-fi novels that you personally enjoy?
Well, Sir Larry was born in 1938. I was born in 1960, so there's quite a significant difference. But I remember you mentioned I won the Hugo Award. I also won the Nebula, which is the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America's award for Best Novel of the Year. And I won it in 1995. So I won it for a book that came out in 95, so I won it in the spring of 96. Larry won for a book that came out in 1970, so he got it in the spring of 71. So 25 years previously, Larry had won it. He was at the event where I won mine. And I was able to look and say, 25 years ago, you know exactly how I feel today, because you were there 25 years ago. With the same feeling of your peers saying you had written the best book that any of us had written this entire year. Really heady feeling, I must say. And Larry and I hit it off. We are so politically opposite. He's very right. I'm very left. He, was very privileged. He, when he was 18, his father handed him $1 million and said, "Don't lose it." And that was back when $1 million was a huge amount of money. So Larry never had to work a day in his life except what he wanted to do, which was be a writer. There's no question that coming from a certain amount of privilege colors your perspective. It's ironic how many people who come from privilege, who had it literally handed to them, as Larry did, here's $1 million, don't lose it. End up being very right-wing and thinking, people should pull themselves up by their bootstraps, right? Just like I did it, but I've heard of a guy who did it, and he was a good guy. Larry's grandfather was the Doheny of Doheny fame in the development of Los Angeles. You'll see streets named after him and buildings named after him and so forth. So there was a lot of family money. But Larry is just an absolutely brilliant ideas guy, and loves science fiction, loves science fiction fandom. We get along really well. I get along with most of us get along really well, despite convergent or divergent politics, I should say. I've never wanted to collaborate. I get asked periodically to collaborate. Larry did a lot of collaborations, many with his friend and my friend Jerry Cornell, for instance. Sadly, Jerry has passed away. And also with Steve Barnes and others, and David Gerald. David has asked me repeatedly to collaborate with him. He's the guy who invented the tribbles for Star Trek. Doesn't interest me. I don't want to collaborate with anybody. I like telling my own stories. But I get along really well. But it is an interesting question there, Adam, because Larry I read before I met him, and loved his work. He was very instrumental, influential in me becoming a science fiction writer. There are a lot of writers today who are my good friends who I'm afraid to read, because what if I don't like their work as much as I like the person, right? It's kind of they haven't read me, we're buddies, and we go, "Oh, Rob, a good review, bestseller, way to go, wonderful, another award, nice. Oh, the download, it's doing really well." Not going to read it or listen to it to understand, because what if I don't like it? Then I might think somewhat less of you, right? So it's an interesting community to be part of. Until the explosion in the last decade of 10,000 self-published science fiction writers flooding Kindle Direct Publishing and Kindle Unlimited and Amazon, there were only about 1,000 people writing science fiction in the English language worldwide, and only maybe 150 of us in the entire world doing it full time for a living. So we all knew each other. And mostly liked each other. And one of the key things, to come back to people who are asking about writing, is part of what we liked about each other is we didn't think of each other as competitors. We thought of each other as colleagues. The ones who never make it are the ones who think that other writers are their competitors. They aren't. You can't write my stories. I can't write your stories. I just did an interview for Locus, which is the trade magazine, the professional journal of the science fiction field. And the interviewer, Eliza, who's the editor, asked me, what are you working on next? And I told her. Now, if I thought everybody was my competitor, it's hard to tell you that, because somebody will read the interview and steal my idea. Nobody's going to steal your idea. And even if they do, they can't write it the way you would write it. There's a million different ways to reflect on an idea. You were asking me about friendship. Do I believe that interpretation that I put in that book? No. And I didn't write the only book about genetics either. Nancy Kress, around the same time, was writing lots of books about genetics as well. I beat her for the nebula, but that's beside the point.
This is so just kind of a general question about science fiction. As an author, at what point do you think, in the fictional sense or science fiction, does the accuracy of the science that you're writing about go at what point does that accuracy, can it drop out of the story?
So for me, it is hugely important. There's some wild speculations in my work, but as I said, they can't be easily dismissed by what we already know about science. For me, science fiction and fantasy are opposite genres. They often get put into the same section of the bookstore. And the awards now, they're all jointly. The Hugo goes for best science fiction or fantasy novel. It most frequently goes to a fantasy novel because there are more of them and they have more fans in science fiction these days. I think they're opposite. Science fiction is the literature of things that plausibly might happen. Fantasy is the literature of things that never could happen. Magic does not exist. Supernatural powers do not exist. They're fun to read about. I'm not saying these books have no value, but they are not realistic. Science fiction is an incredibly realistic genre. It takes into account the laws of physics, which are often ignored in straightforward fiction. Things that could never happen all the time in mainstream mystery novels. And those of us who care about the laws of physics or the laws of chemistry will say, that's ridiculous. That never could have happened. So for me, the scientific accuracy is hugely important. You get people who are dogmatic and say, well, we know the limit of travel faster than the speed of light. I almost never use faster than light travel in my fiction. But when I do, I point to those people who are doing real research and trying to find ways to move objects faster than the speed of light. So after all, what Einstein showed, the theory of relativity, is that you can't have an object move at the speed of light. Why? Because at the speed of light, your mass becomes infinite, your length becomes zero, and therefore you can't move if you have no length. There's nothing to move. And if your mass is infinite, it takes an infinite amount of power to move you. So nothing can move at the speed of light that has any mass. That's all the theory of relativity says. It doesn't say you can't move faster than the speed of light, but it does mean that there's this barrier that by mere acceleration, you can't get to superluminal, beyond the speed of light, speeds. Because as you approach the speed of light, your mass increases, your length contracts. These are the things that relativity says happens. And time slows down in your perception compared to the outside universe. And at the speed of light, it all comes to either infinity or zero. Time is passing not at all, your length is absolutely zero, and your mass is infinite. Well, there's no way by just adding another few horsepower to your engine that you can accelerate. You need an infinite number of horses to accelerate past the speed of light. But what's warp drive all about? What is the jump drive on Battlestar Galactica all about? It's about finding physics that allows you to go from sublight to superlight velocity without accelerating through a continuum to get there. And there are good speculative, but good models of ways that we might need to be able to accomplish that. And so when I do, on those rare occasions that I put faster than light travel in, there has to be a good justification for why that might be possible.
Thank you.
Dr. Sawyer, I gotta
Just
ask
call
you.
me Rob.
Okay, Rob, I gotta ask you. So we just got done reading Metro 2033 for this month, and then the month before we read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. For December, we want to select another book. We have to nominate and vote for it. You, as an author who's writing science fiction, knows great science fiction. What do you recommend for the club to read during December, and for us to? It could also be one of your own books, but what do
I
you
would
have?
recommend one of my own. Oh my God. Derek Coonskin is a great author, African Canadian, but he's published internationally. His first name is Derek, D-E-R-E-K, and Coonskin, K-U with an umlaut or diaresis, N-S-K-E, and Derek Coonskin. And I'm trying to think of the title, The Quantum Magician. And it has nothing to do with magic. It's a terrible title. As he kind of calls it, a hard science fiction, Ocean's 11, Ocean's 11, caper heist thing. But you mentioned, Adam, you mentioned Larry Niven. Larry was famous for his really bizarre alien life forms in the 70s when nobody was really doing that. And Derek takes that to the nth degree. So The Quantum Magician by Derek Coonskin would be an excellent choice for your next read.
I gotta ask this.
And it's an e-book and paperback and, a print and, audio book, any way you want to get your book, you got it.
Quantum Magician. I gotta ask this. You don't have to comment on this. I am curious. On the internet, there's like rumors that Larry Niven and Harlan Ellison got in a fist fight at one of the awards ceremonies. Would you know if that was true or?
I can't imagine. Harlan, they were both, Harlan's dead now. Harlan's a good friend of mine. Harlan got in fist fights for sure. He got in a fist fight with, what's his name? British writer. Come to me in a second. Absolutely. But Larry is the most gentle, mild, shy, painful shy fellow. Now, Jerry Cornell, his writing partner, was bellicose, belligerent, loud, obnoxious, often drunk, and quite literally and completely politically opposite. Harlan's very left, Jerry's very right. See them coming to fisticuffs. But Larry, I can't imagine. I saw Joe Walton, who was mostly a fantasy but sometimes science fiction writer, once throw a drink into David Brin's face. He's a science fiction writer. I know that Harlan came to fisticuffs with many people over the years, but I can't. And I've never heard that rumor with Larry. But Jerry used to threaten to beat people up. The best thing that happened to Jerry is he finally quit drinking. And he also had and I don't mean to sound flippant or anything, he had a brain tumor. And the treatment, he mellowed a great deal when he actually came to grips with his own mortality. And in the last 15 years of his life, 10 years at least, he was extremely pleasant to be around. Whereas for most of his professional career, he was, a lot of people found quite obnoxious to be around. Harlan definitely got in fights with people for sure, but I can't imagine that happened with Larry. If that turns out to be the case, Harlan, it's funny because Larry's not a big guy. Jerry was a big guy, much taller than me, probably outweighed me 75 pounds of just bulk, not fat at all. And Harlan is just a little guy, 5'2" or something, and Larry's not much bigger than that. So it would have been like slapping him, right?
Yeah. Wow, interesting. Okay. I was always curious. Yeah, I'd heard that Harlan had done a few interesting things at award ceremonies. I was always interested in whether or not that was true. I'm convinced it's not now, but now I'm wondering if someone may have gotten mixed up with Jerry and Harlan.
Oh, quite possibly. Quite possibly. I'm just trying to remember the name of the British writer that he did get into a fist fight with. Anyways, yeah. For sure. I mean, writers are human. Writers sometimes, fight. And unfortunately, the problem with being a writer, for a lot of writers, is you're working at home alone, and there's nobody to supervise your vices. So if your vices are alcohol or drugs or tobacco or whatever it is, you're just there indulging, and when you come out in public, you probably shouldn't have come out in public. You probably don't have fit to be human company for some writers.
Yeah.
Now, I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't do drugs. I like to think I come out in public and I'm reasonably congenial to most people. But there are definitely some writers who had attitude problems and personality problems and simply weren't good dealing with other people. And that's really unfortunate, but that's true.
You guys have any other questions you guys want? I keep checking in with you guys, because otherwise I'm just gonna ask some questions. Anything else in writing questions?
Well,
just go ahead.
why don't we take a little break here?
Okay,
It's an hour and a half. I got to go to the bathroom.
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry. Go ahead, doctor.
So I'll come back in just a minute or two, and you guys think of some questions, and I'll be back.
Okay. Thank you, doctor. By the way, also nice to meet you guys. What's your name?
Harrison.
Nice to meet you, Harrison. Oh, like Harry Harrison. Oh, easy to remember. And then your name?
I'm David.
David. Okay. Okay. Nice to meet you, David. By the way, if you guys want to join the topic about it, just go to the engage or whatever I should do right now. I'm never gonna remove you guys from engage. So normally clubs are like, if you don't do so many meetings a month, I'll remove you. I won't ever do that. So you guys can just pop in and vote and do whatever you guys want to do. There's also this one.
Are we still gonna watch the fly next week?
Yes, we will be watching The Fly next week. Yeah. Have you guys heard of The Fly?
The old one?
Yeah.
The
disgusting. The one that I've become stronger. That one.
I have been fighting for this movie.
Yeah, it's one of the best awful movies, but there's a remastered version that looks very, very beautiful, so I really want to check it out. And the effects are
Have you guys seen Event Horizon?
Is that the one? Okay, don't tell me. That's the one where it's like influenced by Warhammer 40K.
I think so.
Okay, yes. Yes.
I just saw it. And I'm still thinking about
it. We'll watch that after The Fly.
I'm not putting it in there, but
I promise those it.
Definitely The Fly.
December was either going to be The Fly or it was going to be a lovely Christmas movie called The Thing. But we'll watch The Fly, and then after we have time, we'll watch. I love Event Horizon, by the way. Just because event. Do you head now, Jared?
Yeah.
I'll let you go. Have your
When do you guys meet?
Tuesdays and Thursdays from 2 to 5. There's supposed to be a lot more, but it's just like Thanksgiving week. I think it kind of like died down. How you doing, teacher?
Where do you think he's at right now?
Who?
Robert's
What is he talking in Canada? His house.
You said Canada?
Yeah, I think so.
Canada.
Why? If I doesn't matter.
Dude, to be honest, I got like a assignment for journalism class,
Oh,
and
okay.
I gotta take like.
This is recorded, by the way. We will be posting this on the.
Okay, yeah, but I'm supposed to write like I was originally gonna write an issue story, but my sources aren't coming back to me, so I'm having to think on the spot like what to write about.
I see.
This is like either profile or event story.
Yeah.
Where's the Toronto?
Yeah, he said Toronto. Cool.
Yeah, Toronto, Canada.
And I'll probably need you as a source.
Okay, yeah, no problem. Sorry, this is something I'm trying to think.
Okay, I'm back. Thank you for that indulgence. A little break. I see we lost a few people.
Yeah, you either is Jack. Okay, well, yeah, we'll keep. We also got another one here, but everyone's kind of floating in and out. This is recorded and will go on the club website as well, which I think will have more engagement. Unfortunately, this is like Thanksgiving week. We have classes Monday and Tuesday, but I think a lot of the students kind of just decided to take the whole week off, and they've traveled out of state, so it's kind of a little bit of a lower attendance than we're hoping for. But luckily, it's all recorded, so we'll get everyone to engage. I did want to. Sorry, Doctor, I don't mean to rant, but I did want to do a write-up. There's this interesting part in the downloaded where I believe it's Mikhail, the roboticist. He quotes a line from Dr. Jericho in Calculating God, where he says that virtual reality is all air guitar anyways. And there's
Well, the line is virtual reality is nothing but air guitar writ large.
yeah,
And if it's in calculating God,
yeah.
it's because back then I was quoting myself. It's actually the first time I said it was in the terminal experiment.
Oh, interesting.
And I'm glad you caught that because this week, the first person who actually said, I know where that line came from, who he's quoting me. But yeah, that amused me. I also think it's one of my best lines.
Yeah, I think it's very true. Well, see, what's
Virtual
interesting.
reality is nothing but air guitar writ large.
Well, I'm not the only person who's noticed this. This has led to like online. This is what I want to ask. There is there is this interesting interconnected conspiracy theory of your novels that the downloaded might also be in the same universe as Calculating God, because there's like this strange period of time where Calculating God mentions that the world can be destroyed very quickly and computers and everything. And then there's a time when the astronauts are put into the cryogenics, doesn't really know what's going on. And then Terminal Experiment, there's an interesting overlap there with the simulations running in where there's three and everything. I just want to know, is it true? Like, did you interconnect these novels the same universe, or is this just something that happens just by circumstance of being adjacent in thought? If you don't want to ruin it, if you don't want to admit.
So it's interesting. I love the fact, because you keep asking, would you really believe this? Right?
Yeah.
And the answer is, for the purposes of that particular narrative, I took that position. I love the fact that every time I start a new work that isn't part of one of, I have 3 trilogies, but I do standalone novels, which is not the norm. Even though I did it, right? Most of his work falls into the known space series.
Yes.
And some of the books are hundreds or thousands of years apart in time from others. So they don't have the same characters, or they're still in a coherent universe. And Asimov, Isaac Asimov, was famous for 2 series, his Foundation series, Foundation trilogy, which is, as I say, currently a TV show, and his robot novels. And then late in life, he decided that he was going to blend them into one coherent universe. I think that was a mistake. I think it's way more interesting that every time I start a new book, things that were useful, ideas, conceits, philosophical points from previous works I might use again, or I might argue the exact opposite in a different book. So that's interesting that people are debating about that. It certainly is not my intention that the download be in the same universe as anything else that I've written. Partly, this comes down to a reality of monetizing your intellectual property. So, for instance, I have a novel called Red Planet Blues, which is a hard-boiled detective novel set on Mars. Well, it started as a novella called Identity Theft. And that ended up being the first 10 chapters of a 40 or 50 chapter novel. And then I also wrote a sequel short story called Biding Time. So we're trying right now to set up a TV version of Red Planet Blues. Well, when I license Red Planet Blues, I have to, in the same package, give them the Identity Theft novella and the sequel short story, because they want to lock up that universe.
Interesting.
Right? And so if all my works were interconnected, then somebody basically, for one licensing fee, acquires the Sawyerverse the way one acquires the Marvel universe, right? And it's more creatively liberating and B, economically advantageous to have a bunch of separate intellectual properties, except for the fact that the surefire way to get readers is to have an ongoing series that they like. One of my best friends is Kevin J. Anderson, and Kevin and Brian Herbert, who's the son of Frank Herbert, have been now for 20 years or so writing novels in the Dune universe, created by Brian's father, Frank. Dune, of course, Frank wrote, I think, 7 Dune novels before he died. And there are many more than 7 that have been written by Brian and Frank. Brian and Kevin. And Kevin is a great writer. And Ryan is a great writer in his own right. But nothing that they have written on their own has sold anywhere near as well as the Dune stuff. Now, hope always is, well, if I write in the Dune universe, all those Dune fans will also go over and buy everything else that I write because they will become fans of me. No, that's not the case. To come back to Larry Niven, Larry Niven's known space series was continued by a writer, a very good friend of mine, named Edward Lerner. And Ed wrote novels set in the Ringworld universe, Fleet of Worlds, and one of anyways, he kept hoping that fans would discover him because they read Niven all. So Ed wrote a novel, several novels, but he wrote a novel on his own and sent it to the same publisher who had been doing the collaborations, the pseudo-collaborations of Larry Niven and Edward Lerner. And that publisher Tor, my publisher as well, at that time. And Tor said, oh, we love this book. We'll be happy to publish it if you put Larry's name on it and put it first. So it's by Larry Niven. And Edward. But Larry had nothing to do with this. Yeah, but there are no Edward Lerner fans. They're only Larry Niven fans. They're only fans of the established franchise. You're naive to think that there's any spillover effect or any appreciable spillover effect. So those who make their career writing a single series, and in detective writing, mystery fiction, that most writers' careers is that one detective character doing 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 novels in a career about that single character or group of characters. That's the most successful because what you find is, guess what? There actually aren't fans of Robert B. Parker, the mystery writer. They're only fans of Spencer, his mystery character. I don't know exactly what point I was making there. It's creatively liberating to reboot every time you start a new book. And in terms of licensing your IP, intellectual property piecemeal, it's also the best way. But the single most lucrative thing a writer can do is have a career that's based on a single contiguous property. George R. Martin's big career, of course, is the Game of Thrones series. But his best stuff, I think, is his science fiction work. But how many people who read Game of Thrones went off and read Sand Kings, which was his Nebula, and I think also Hugo Award-winning science fiction work? Nobody. Not even the nearest percent, 0% of Game of Thrones fans have ever read anything by George that isn't part of the Game of Thrones universe. And that's the way it is for most writers, no matter how successful they are, it's their property that has the fans, not the writer per se. I've bucked that in my career. I've tried to make a career about building an audience who likes my philosophy and my politics and my sense of humor, but not necessarily any particular set of characters or a particular universe.
I don't mean to go off on a tangent. This is the only time I'll ask specifically about another person's work, but it's been a running joke among me and my friends about the Ringworld novel, some of the wacky things in that novel. What's your opinion of the Ringworld novel? What do you think of like the events, the character development story, anything really?
Ringworld by Larry Niven.
Yeah, Ringworld by Larry Niven.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a saying in science fiction that the golden age of science fiction is when you're 16. Whatever year that is, that's the golden age. Because you're wowed by the big ideas, but you're not really interested in sophisticated characters. You haven't read enough to really appreciate fine writing. But boy, a big idea can just knock you socks off. Well, that's when I was reading Larry Niven, right, when I was in my middle teenage years. And that's most of Larry's strengths are the things that really appeal to those who are first discovering big ideas. The characterization in Ringworld is minimal, broadly drawn. The characters are subtle and nuanced in any way. And, you have to cut slack for when something was written. Ringworld was written in the 60s and came out in 1970. But the portrayal of Tila Brown, indeed most women in Larry's work from that era, is deplorably sexist by modern standards. Larry hasn't published for a long time. His work was, his great work was in the 70s, the 60s through the early 70s and the late 70s when he started collaborating with Jerry. And Jerry brought a sophistication of characterization that Larry never had to the stories. So Ringworld is one of the best novels of ideas. Its plot is incredibly simplistic. Almost nothing happens in Ringworld. They crash on the Ringworld is this torus at 93 million miles distance from a star. So it's like as if the Earth had a solid ring where its orbit was, enormous amount of land if you were to go around the circle. But in Ringworld, they crash and they go to the edge. Still a big distance, but it's nothing compared to the scope of the Ringworld. So he has this huge story canvas, and he has this tiny little plot. They pull themselves, actually it's not to the edge, but to drop through a meteor hole that has been drilled through the Ringworld. The characters are broad caricatures. The prose is pedestrian and not particularly polished, but the ideas are mind-blowing. That was Larry's strength as a writer.
Beautiful. That's very beautiful. Do you guys have any questions?
And I'll just say parenthetically, Ringworld has been under option to be made into a TV series or miniseries forever. For a time, I was collaborating on a different project with the guy who had been hired to do one of the various adaptations of Ringworld. And he was pulling his hair out. I visited him in his office where he had it all on index cards all over his walls as he tried to figure out how to have believable, interesting, human, relatable characters in this story and have something other than just the big idea that is the physics of the Ringworld. And like everybody else who's tried to adapt Ringworld, wasn't able to make it work.
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever heard of the Halo video game franchise.
Sure, of course. They stole the Ringworld idea from Larry.
Interesting. Okay, so this is like a hot seat of contention.
And I say stole in the,
yeah.
You say
homage,
you say homage, I say plagiarism,
potato. Yeah. So I gotta say this personally. So I've read all like 22 novels in the series, even the Kazinti Wars, everything.
So you read the ones by my friend Greg Bear.
Greg Bear, yes, and he worked on the Halo novels later on when they hired to write books on the series. Now, what's interesting is there are so many similarities, like from the Prophets, the Puppeteers, from the Sangheili, the Kazinti. I mean, there's so many. Even the infection, the galactic explosion, everything is one-to-one pretty much in the series. Niven never gave a statement. I think Niven ended up playing the games. He has like one strange Facebook post where he defends Halo, and then he plays the games, and then shortly after, I think there was like some lawsuit or something. So I wonder if his opinion ever changed. What do you think of when other IPs kind of quote unquote borrow ideas, like they claim to be inspired, but it's just what's your take on it? What do you think is an idea that you own?
It's morally reprehensible. That's what any author's take should be. There's an episode of one of the Star Trek series, I won't say which one, that is an absolute blatant rip-off of one of my novels, where the writer of the script acknowledged that he had read my novel. And nonetheless said, well, they call it filing off the serial numbers. You know that metaphor of stolen property, and there's a serial number, they file it off so they can fence it and sell it and keep a trace. They call it in Hollywood filing off the serial numbers, where you change enough details that you hopefully can dodge a plagiarism lawsuit. And also, Hollywood exists on this paradigm that says, we're going to steal and rob you blind, but if you ever sue, you will never sell anything in this town again.
Interesting.
if you ever have. So, Harlan Ellison, as I said, was a friend of mine, and he had a beautiful house, mansion, in Los Angeles. And you could walk through his mansion, which was filled with memorabilia, including checks that he had received, that he had got made re-enlargements of on his walls, of people that he sued for plagiarism and won, including James Cameron, the maker of Terminator, who had ripped off 2 Harlan Ellison scripts from an old TV series called The Outer Limits. There's a more recent color version of it. The original version of the 60s was black and white. Harlan wrote a story called Soldier, about a time-traveling cyborg from the future comes back to assassinate a person who was going to do blah, blah, blah. It's this exact plot of Terminator. And these lawsuits are extremely hard to win because copyright law protects the expression of an idea, the exact words that are used to express an idea. It's really hard to prove that the idea itself has been lifted. And ultimately, the way that Harlan eventually won is one of his expert witnesses said, yeah, I overheard Cameron saying I'm ripping off a couple of old Harlan Ellison scripts. And that sunk the case. Because otherwise, Cameron's, these ideas are in the air and anybody can write them and blah, blah, blah. Larry, we talked about my friend David Gerald, and there was a lot of screw-ups about his triples on Star Trek, because they very closely resemble Martian flat casts from a novel called The Rolling Stones by Robert A. Heinlein. And Heinlein, it's absolutely in Heinlein's correspondence. Corresponded with his agent about whether or not he should sue for plagiarism. And he thought ultimately, no, I'm not going to. The idea, the execution is different enough that these things are time-consuming, and I don't want to destroy a promising young writer's career, blah, blah, blah. But, the theft by Hollywood of intellectual property is absolutely rampant. Stan Lee is famous not for the things he actually created, but the things he actually got people to sign over the rights to him for. And it's just reprehensible. There's no other word for it. The theft is unbelievable, and it happens all the time. And then they say, you should be flattered, right? No, you're not flattered. You've been robbed. As if somebody reached into your pocket and taken money out of your wallet.
Do you guys have questions on the way? I don't want to just keep asking questions.
Well, kind of in regards to like the movies and stuff, would you say that you have like a favorite sci-fi movie, and what certain aspects or concepts are you most fascinated about those movies?
I didn't catch that question.
He said, do you have a favorite sci-fi movie, and what are some of your favorite sci-fi concepts that you seem interested in?
So this is interesting because my favorite science fiction films are obscure these days, although the top 3 are 2001: A Space Odyssey, which still is the most ambitious science fiction film ever made. It's incredibly slow-paced by today's standards, and a lot of the fundamental core ideas are idiotic in it. But it still is just such a sincere attempt to do a serious science fiction story. The original Planet of the Apes, which doesn't hold up at all, despite my definition of science fiction having to be plausible, doesn't hold up at all plausibly, but it is so good at what science fiction should try to do, which is with metaphor and disguise make trenchant social comment. Planet of the Apes, the original, came out in 1968, so it was made in February of 68, so it was made in 67. And it, as I always say, any work of science fiction isn't about whatever year putatively is set in. Putatively, Planet of the Apes is set in the year 3978 AD, 2,000 years from now. Not about that year at all. It's about 1967. It's about the two things that were front page news in every newspaper all over the world in 1967, which were race relations and the fear of nuclear war. And Planet of the Apes is entirely a parable about race relations and the fear of nuclear war. And it does it so powerfully and so well. If you haven't actually seen it, I commend it to your attention. You might say, oh, the makeup is not as believable as the CGI they do today with the current age films. I can debate with you about that. But the performances, I think it was the first science fiction film ever made in which both the male and female lead actors were already Oscar winners. Charlton Heston had already won a Best Actor Oscar for his portrayal of Ben-Hur. And Kim Hunter, who plays Dr. Syrah, the female chimpanzee, had already won a Best Supporting Actress Oscar for her portrayal in the movie A Streetcar Named Desire. This was the first really A-list science fiction film, and it's spectacularly good at social comment. Whereas there's no social comment at all in 2001: A Space Odyssey, but it was spectacularly good at trying to extrapolate into the future. And the third one is one that most people have never even heard of. It's called Quatermass and the Pit. And it is a film version of what was originally a BBC television serial with a different cast that we made earlier. But it is one of the very few science fiction films that's actually about science being done by real, normal people who are scientists, rather than super scientists like Tony Stark in Iron Man. It's philosophically fascinating, it's really interesting social comment, and its depiction of science at work and scientists working is absolutely spot on. It's just a terrific film. Those are my three favorites. Then yes, you can point out the fact that all of them are from the 1960s. Back before 2001, most of the special effects are pretty damn good, even by today's standards. But as science fiction, starting in '77 with Star Wars, where the pivot went to the more eye-candy and less thoughtfulness in science fiction, most modern science fiction films have left me uninterested because they're not philosophically deep. They're just special effects extravaganzas. Yes, I see a hand.
Speaking of that, I recently started watching, not recently, but the X-Files. I feel that in terms of, it has a lot of, I think, thoughtful commentary on a lot of those. Anyway, what's your thought on the X-Files in terms of that?
So for me, it's funny. I probably should have liked the X-Files, but I did not like the X-Files. I did not like, Fox Mulder's position was, I want to believe. And I'm a skeptic. I think one should say, show me the evidence. Not that I'm predisposed to think everything is extraterrestrial or supernatural, but rather, boy, Carl Sagan used to say, extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. And so the X-Files never really worked for me. The most interesting ones, they had standalone episodes, and they also had what they called the mythology episodes, which dealt with kind of the UFO backstory and the abduction of Fox Mulder's younger sister and so forth. The mythology ones were interesting, but one of the things I learned working in television adaptation of my own books, Flash Forward, is these clowns in Hollywood just make it up as they go along. They like you to believe they've got it all worked out in intimate detail in advance, and there's going to be a grand conclusion, the payoff is going to be worth it. And time and again, X-Files is a perfect example. It just peters out at the end. There's no great conclusion. There's no mystery resolved that was worth all the time you spent investing in it. Because it's really easy to do what I did and download it. Have a bunch of astronauts who've been frozen wake up and find that somebody who couldn't have possibly gotten into their chamber, nobody could have been there, has caved in a skull. The real art that most writers are not up to is coming up with a conclusion at the end that actually makes the payoff make sense. I don't think X-Files ever accomplished that. There was a series that Chris Carter created, X-Files. Credits with having been the precursor to the X-Files. It's called The Night Stalker, or sometimes Kolchak, The Night Stalker, about an intrepid newspaper reporter who kept stumbling onto supernatural stories. And his editor at the paper was the skeptic. And he was this, 50-something, dumpy-looking guy. And it's been said that the X-Files, or the Night Stalker was like the X-Files, but with ugly people instead of beautiful people in the cast. Which is kind of true. But the X-Files, I found Fox Mulder's character so unrelentingly serious that there was, I didn't find much joy in watching him. And Dana Scully was fine, but whereas in The Night Stalker, there was always a twinkle in the eye and a lot of humor leavening the whole thing. And I just enjoyed it much more than I enjoyed what is clearly a derivative. Chris Carter clearly acknowledges the derivative of The Night Stalker, which is the X-Files. But enjoy it. I have lots of friends who love it. I mentioned Kevin Anderson, amongst his other works that sells hugely or sold hugely. He did some original X-Files novels, and X-Files fans loved them.
Harrison, in Calculating God, there's a character called Hollis. It's an alien. It's an octoped. It's called a Felinor. And there's 2 or 3 paragraphs that Dr. Sawyer dedicates to the alien critiquing X-Files.
Really?
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
And the alien's like, what's the deal with this show? It never shows aliens. Like every episode we watch it, and it peters out at the end. Like it's so funny. And then they mention how their favorite show is South Park or something like that. It's really
with the anal probes.
I didn't want to mention that, but yeah. Yeah, I'm tempted to become a sci-fi writer just to be friends with all these guys. I want to.
It's a very friendly community. I mean, you mentioned you've been to a science fiction convention that Larry was at. I don't know. You said that, right?
Yes. There was one.
Which one did you go to?
So there's a. I kind of don't want to say. There's a sci-fi convention in Pasadena, California. It was also the same time as like a furry convention thing.
Oh yeah, I was guest of honor once at a furry convention. I've never written furry fiction in my life, but I wrote a series about intelligent dinosaurs.
Yeah.
There's a convention called Conference, F-U-R, for furry fans.
Yes.
And they had their Conference 8. This is the most convoluted reasoning for having these guests of honor. Conference 8, there are 81. How many notes are there in a scale? There are 8 notes. What should we celebrate for our furry convention? How about scaly anthropomorphics? Well, who has written about intelligent reptiles? Oh, Rob Sawyer has. So I got to be guest of honor and witness the most astonishing things going on.
Yeah, so there was a sci-fi convention and a furry convention at the same time, and I went to go. This is actually when I ran into Larry Niven and asked him one question, then I had to move along. But at the time, it was a very enclosed room, and a lot of people really don't practice good hygiene. And some of the furry people were doing something called crinkling. I don't want to explain here, but it's a very strange, unhygienic practice. But anyways, yes, that was in. We do want to go to a sci-fi convention. The Sci-Fi Club mentioned it as a group. So if you ever have any plans for California. We'll definitely drop everything and go support you.
I was almost going to be at LostCon in Los Angeles this coming Thanksgiving weekend.
Oh, wow.
But I chickened out because I just was too tired after having been in China for 2 weeks. Hang on for 1 second. I just want to speak to my Alexa.
Yeah, sure, right. Sorry, guys.
Just turning off the heat in my room here. It's cold here in Toronto. But is all the beauty of science fiction conventions, not like San Diego Comic-Con, which I've been special guest at, wonderful thing. But at those things, anybody who's a creator is separated from the fans, except You can see them up on panels, or you can line up and give them money for their autographs. But in traditional literary science fiction conventions, everybody just hangs out, and nobody's trying to bilk you of money, and you just, you get, whether you're, as long as you've got something interesting or funny to say, everybody welcomes you. It doesn't matter if you're a writer, a reader, whatever you are. It's more than welcome, as long as you're pleasant and engaging.
So what's your personal recommendation on breaking into the sci-fi literary world? Should you start with like short stories, magazine publications, websites, or just going to events? What's your strategy?
So it depends what your goal is. If your goal is traditional publishing by Tor or Ace or one of the traditional science fiction publishers at book form, then short stories is the standard way to do it. I would say about 3/4 of my colleagues, including myself, that's how we got our start. We started writing short fiction and used those short fiction credentials to build a little bit of a name for ourselves so that either editors or maybe agents would take us seriously. And that's the traditional path. If, on the other hand, you just want to self-publish novels, nobody cares if you've been published in Analog, Asimov, Science Fiction Magazine, or any of those things. They're meaningless to the audience who mostly buys Kindle Unlimited, generic space opera, which is what most of the self-published science fiction novels are. So it depends on your goal. If you want a traditional science fiction career like I had, with books in bookstores and the major awards, then short fiction is the excellent entree point. There are many fine online publications. Clark's World is excellent. I mean, Ceaseless Skies is excellent. There are many fine print publications that also have electronic editions. Asimov Science Fiction Magazine, the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, and Analog being the big three. One of the beauties of starting short fiction is it's way easier to do that Carpenter thing I was talking about. Start something, finish it, and realize what the mistakes were, rather than a novel is a huge undertaking. Find out whether you can actually write scenes, write characters, write a plot, getting middle and end in 5,000 or 7,500 words for a short story. I'm also a judge for the Writers of the Future contest, which has Larry Niven as a judge. Kevin J. Anderson, many of the people I mentioned today are judges. And Jerry Cornell, since they passed away. Robert Silverberg, and so many great, Nettie Okorafor, Nancy Cresser, which is a judge. Go to our website, writersofthefuture.com. We give big cash prizes, there's no entry fee, and you're judged by the top writers in the industry.
Do you have any tips or advice for what the judges like to see for Writers of the Future?
Yeah, so it varies from judge to judge, but I always say, we take stories up to 17,000 words long, which is quite long. And I always say that it's so much easier to win the contest with a really well-done short story than a long story. So many of the longer entries, I say, if this was 5,000 or 10,000 words shorter, tighter, it would be a prize winner. But I've often seen short stories, 5,000, 7,000 words come across where I want to change a word, this is perfect. It isn't the way I would write it, but the author has written it perfectly for that author. And that's it. And then just make sure your prose is well polished. There are lots of people who come out of Larry Niven school, or in Isaac Asimov school, where if they ever find a beautiful sentence, they will cut it out because it goes contrary to their beliefs, right?
Yeah.
Good writing, good tight writing. Yeah.
We got another question here. It says, do you think new discoveries in science ruin the immersion or the believability of older science fiction stories, or that ruins the story in general? Or do you think there's something
that doesn't ruin it? So I collect plastic dinosaurs, among other things. So this is it. Here's a fairly classic Stegosaurus right here. You notice the thing called the thagomizer on the back, which is the spikes at the back. The spikes are sticking up. We thought forever that Stegosaurus spikes stuck up like that. the time this was made, this was an accurate stegosaurus.
But guess what we learned subsequently? The spikes actually, where's my camera? The spikes actually go horizontal. They're held parallel to the ground, not vertically. That's a new interpretation. Do I throw out this old lovely stegosaurus? No, he's right here, guarding my workspace. The only criterion you can fairly judge any work by is the standards of the year it was written in. To go in and say that William Shakespeare is sexist is ridiculous. He wasn't sexist for the time he wrote him. To go in and say that, Huckleberry Finn is racist is ridiculous. He wasn't racist at the time that Mark Twain wrote it. To go in and say that a science fiction story is no longer good because science has passed it by is also ridiculous. If it was right at the time the author wrote it, then you judge it on that basis. All kinds of science fiction stories are obsolete in the sense that they couldn't be published today as fresh stories because we know things that we didn't know. Larry David's first story was called The Coldest Place. And the irony was it was set on Mercury, which of course we think is the hottest place, right? Because we used to think Mercury's year is 88 Earth days. And we used to think that Mercury's day was 88 days long, so that it always kept the same face towards the sun. Well, it's the closest planet to the sun, and therefore the hottest place in the solar system, of course, is the side of the Mercury that's always facing the sun, and therefore the coldest place would be the opposite side, the Antipodes, the part that never faces the sun. Well, that was a great story, except between the time he wrote it and the time it actually appeared in the magazine, sold it and appeared in the magazine, in that gap, we discovered, no, actually Mercury's day is 57 days long, 2/3 of its year, which turns out to be a very common relationship, a common resonance for celestial bodies. We didn't know that at the time. We were wrong. But Larry's story was a really clever story that was accurate at the time it was written, and still gets, is available in his collections and so forth. Doesn't make it wrong retroactively. It was right. All you can ever do is rewrite. 2001: Space Odyssey is one of the greatest science fiction films ever made. Well, except in 2001, we didn't have a city on the moon. We didn't have an orbiting centrifugal force, ring-shaped space station. We didn't have interplanetary man travel. We didn't have artificial intelligence. We didn't have hibernation to go to other planets. All of that, they said we should have had 22 years ago, if you believe that film. Is the film garbage now because it didn't turn out that 1968's predictions about 2001 were a little way too rosy and optimistic about technological progress, while being incredibly blinkered about social progress, having not a single person of color in the film, having the only female person who isn't subservient being a fraction, because all the Westerners had to be either stewardesses or babysitters. No, it's just of its time. You have to judge it by its time. Those of us who, it's very in vogue right now to say, we'll look at this ancient work or this old work and say, and dismiss it as being, beneath contempt because we judge it by our standards today. And yet, I'm absolutely convinced that 50 years from now, any one of you who is drinking from a plastic bottle, any one of you who is not a vegan, any one of you who is let an election go by that didn't vote when you were eligible to vote will be regarded as reprehensible by history. It is so arrogant of us to say that we're the peak of civilization and we look back on the science or the society of 5, 10, 20, 50, 100, 1,000 years ago and say we discard that, we eliminate that from our purview of consideration because it doesn't jive with our contemporary perfect final version of what human ethics and morality are going to be. We are going to be found as wanting by the future as we find the past wanting by our standards.
Okay, I have a deep question for you here now that we've had some time to talk about economic stuff and other things. So recently, you're talking about science of science fiction, academic research. I noticed that you put a lot of academic research into your novels. And there's two questions here. One is, are you aware of Penrose's conformal cyclical universe model?
I'm aware of it. I know Roger. Of course I'm aware of it.
And what do you think of its relation to what the alien says in Calculating God about the cycles before, the particular nature of that? And the second thing is, what does research for a novel look like?
So, of course, I'm aware of Roger Penrose's interpretation. The interesting thing about Roger is, of course, he won the Nobel a few years ago, right? And the thing about Nobel laureates, it's actually writing a book now that has 6 Nobel laureates, and one from each category that we give Nobels in, is that they tend to become, it's called the Nobel disease. And the farther, once you won the Nobel, you start having more and more fringe ideas because nobody has the guts to criticize you anymore, right? Like I'm Roger Penrose, I won the Nobel Prize in Physics. You can't. You a little undergrad, what do you possibly know that I don't know, right? And B, how are you going to make a splash? You're not going to make a splash unless you say something outrageous. So Roger may be right. I think Roger's way more interesting when he talks about the quantum mechanical possibilities for consciousness, which he put forward in 1985 or so in his book, The Emperor's New Mind, that eventually led to his collaboration with Stuart Hameroff that got us to where we are today with the quantum theories about the legitimate quantum theories about consciousness that I riff on and downloaded. But again, Roger might be right, he might be wrong. The cyclic universe might be right, he might be wrong. We find more data as we go along. We used to think that there's one cycle of creation, one Big Bang, and then we started to think, well, first we saw the steady state, right? Fred Hoyle's the steady state, and then the Big Bang theory came along, which Hoyle named derisively, that's just a Big Bang, ridiculous concept, it's a derisive term. And then, if there's one Big Bang, they were in a cyclic universe. And then we thought, okay, well, will our universe close? And we thought, well, yeah, it's going to close. Now we know, wait a minute. The universe, expansion of the universe is accelerating, not decelerating. What was going on? Now we've added dark energy as a possible, as a hypothetical explanation for why the universe is expanding at an accelerating instead of decelerating rate. We don't know. The job of the science fiction writer is precisely what I said earlier, to find the most entertaining explanation for observed phenomenon that's not easily gainsaid by what we already know. Roger is very much playing a science fiction writer's game right now, throwing out interesting, speculative ideas that he won't live long enough, and maybe I won't, maybe you won't live long enough to find out whether it's correct or not. It's like, the best job security for a physicist is string theory, makes no testable predictions, cannot be falsified, and therefore nobody can say, oh, you barked up the wrong tree and you're out of the job.
Yeah, there's this great quote that Kurt Gödel says to Einstein when Gödel finds this perfect mathematical framework for the universe, four-dimensional models, works through time-like curves, and Einstein says, well, that's great, but that doesn't really work for our universe. We have this other model. And then Gödel says, oh, don't worry, I'm not writing about this universe. I'm writing about a different universe, right? And so...
actually, riff on that. Gödel's a character in my novel, The Oppenheimer Alternative. So is Einstein. And they talk about that very issue in the novel.
Interesting. I, for one, as a mathematician, I think Gödel's model is correct. I don't like the current land, but that's a whole different thing. But I think he is correct. And it's not just because I'm a huge fan of time travel. It's because of a bunch of other things. But anyways, another deeper question I want to ask here, and this is ultimately my last question, but I'm sure people have...
Yeah, my voice is going. I hear it so much.
I guess... Wait, let me think of how I want to work this. I guess I want to know what is in the future for Dr. Robert Sawyer. What do you have? Do you have any new ideas you're interested in? Any new plans, or are you gonna win like 5 more Nebula awards?
I'm not going to win any more awards. I'm at the stage in my career where you get Lifetime Achievement Awards. I've gotten about 4 of them at this point.
Yeah.
That you can define one way or another as a Lifetime Achievement Award. And that's where they're saying, bye-bye. Okay, boomer, you're done. Move off. It's time for a younger writer to get some spotlight. And that's perfectly fine. That's the way it should be. I got a Lifetime Achievement Award this past spring. I was just guest of honor at the World Science Fiction Convention, which is a de facto Lifetime Achievement Award, being guest of honor. I'm working on a book right now called Domestic Us, and I will probably finish that book. And it may very well be my final book, which is perfectly fine. There's a problem. People, and I had this conversation with some writer friends that's writing for Troops at Calgary this past weekend. Said, well, you know, artists, meaning writers and creators, they never really retire. And I said, but they should. They seem to be getting good. They either go off school, things like Roger Penrose, or they write self-indulgent stuff. You know, George Lucas is a classic example. Original Star Wars movie, whatever you may think of it. I'm not a huge fan of what Star Wars did to science fiction, but it's a really tightly plotted, well-constructed movie for what it set out to be, which is a fairy tale. Long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. It's just a riff on the opening of classic fairy tales. A long time ago, in a land far, far away. Story of a wizard, a princess, and a nobly born, death-predestined hero doesn't know his birthright. You know, it's a classic fairy tale. But it's really tightly structured. And then you get to the Phantom Menace, and it's garbage. And George Lucas had reached a point where nobody would dare say to him, George, you're not firing on all cylinders, or George, that's just not very good. And this happens to so many authors that they reach a point. They just published Publishers Weekly, which is the trade journal of the publishing industry, did its annual salary review for what people in publishing make. And the average salary for an editor in publishing is about, at a big 5 publishing company, about $75,000 a year. Not a huge amount of money by today's standards, and far less than most successful authors make per year. So you reach a point very quickly where you're better paid than the editor who's supposed to tell you that you have to work harder. That power dynamic for a lot of authors goes to their head. They become what's called uneditable or editor-proof, where they can just say, well, gee, you know, if you don't like what I'm doing, I'll just ask the publisher to give me a different editor. You're out of job, right? So Robert Heinlein is the classic example of a great science fiction writer who should have stopped 3, 4, 5, 6 books before he actually stopped, gone out on an island. I admire the hell out of people like Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld, who decided, we're going to stop Seinfeld. I think the last episode was problematic, but we're going to stop Seinfeld while it's still a top 10 hit, rather than just keep yanking the same teats in hopes that we can milk this thing forever. So I'm working on a book. I'm enthusiastic about what you asked earlier about what research looks like. Research is the part I enjoy. I write my books to support my research habit. And if something continues to intrigue me, I'll continue to research it. If it sparks an idea, then I may write another book after Domestic Us, but I'm not guaranteeing that I will.
I gotta ask this, Doctor. So you teach at the University of...
I used to. I haven't done that for a while. It doesn't pay well enough. I say that to all you budding academics there. Hey, my father was a university professor back in the day when it was a really good career. If you got your PhD, and then you got, you were assistant professor, associate professor, and then full professor, and then tenured, and then professor emeritus. You were set for life. And so many academics, as you well know, I'm sure, Adam, end up being sessional instructors, and they're paid abysmally. Hardly anybody gets tenure anymore. So I gave up
teaching because I had so many interesting things I was doing, script writing, giving keynote addresses, writing my novels, and teaching was, and writing short stories. First I gave up short stories, they weren't lucrative at all. Then I gave up teaching, just given the lifetime is finite. You know, I got a fatal diagnosis, lifetime is finite. You got to do triage on your time, and teaching fell by the wayside. But yes, I did teach for many years, creative writing. Part-time at continuing education courses. I never taught in a daytime.
I'll say that I think, if I'm right with the timeline, you started teaching at around the height of your popularity, I want to say.
Oh, yeah.
What was it like being a professor or teaching? Were like the students aware of who you were and how that
Of course, that's why they took the course. Absolutely, 100%. And that's why, I never went looking for teaching opportunities. They all came to me. University of Toronto, what's now called Toronto Metropolitan University, but at that time was Ryerson University. The other places I taught, they approached me. I never went looking for a teaching or residency. I was writing residence at various institutions. Everybody came to me and asked me if I wanted to do it because I was at the height of my popularity with students. Of course, they knew who I was. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that's the last one question. I don't know if you guys have anything else you want to add? Jose? How you Garrison?
I answered a lot of my questions.
Okay, the rest of what I want to talk about is like purely self-indulgent here. But what do you think? Have you read Death World by Harry Harrison?
No, Harry was a friend of mine. That's what I'll say about almost any author you name. Harry's dead now.
Yeah.
He was a friend of mine, and like me, had been a president of the Science Fiction Fantasy Writers of America. I read Harry's West of Eden trilogy, but there's a lot of Harry that I haven't read, and I've not read that. I understand it's great. I think people love it.
Yeah, it's one of the only sci-fi books that I think I cannot understand how it's not a movie because it's so fantastic. Also, Doctor, I want to say you keep mentioning that you're older or whatever. I consider you very young. Like I see you as a very young. I don't know. Maybe it's just like because everyone sci-fi is an old guy now, but you definitely have more you could do. I don't want you to think that like you're out the door. There's a lot of people who still love your work and want more books from you and everything. You were like the
Adam. Thank you.
These guys are loud. These guys don't understand. But like from like late '90s to like early 2000s, you had if it was a Robert Sawyer book, it was the best book, and then it was like so many other authors. Like I don't want to say anything. This is recorded, but Hugos now have become so political. Like when Kim Stanley Robinson won for what's that novel?
Red Mars.
Yeah, Red Mars, but there was another one that recently won. It's called like 21 something.
Oh yeah. It is a year. Yeah. Stan's Ribbon.
And there was like boycotts and
protests. It was climate fiction, right?
Yes.
It acknowledged the fundamental defining truth of the middle of the 21st century, which is anthropogenic, human-caused climate change is an existential crisis, and some assholes came out of the woodwork and pissed on the book instead. And they're the ones who are leading us into ruin, right?
Yeah.
It's incredible blinders. I'm taking some knocks in the downloaded in some of the reviews on Audible.
Oh yeah, I saw that.
Right? I mean, we have, unfortunately, this cancel culture, this desire to not engage in debate, which is what I was decrying way back to Calculating God. I said the skeptical community is refusing even to engage with the serious scientists, with PhDs from reputable institutions who were trying to refute, I don't think they ultimately did, but were trying to meet Darwin's challenge. We were refusing to engage and tried to cancel them. And this anti-intellectual, and it happens all the time on, I don't know how it is at Fresno, but it happens all the time on university campuses that if you're not preaching the particular dogma that is currently in vogue, you are shut down. Universities are supposed to be the place where you can come and argue vociferously a point of view that isn't popular, and maybe convince some people, or maybe convince yourself that you're wrong.
But the moment universities became factories for making people think streamlined, narrow thoughts, and they happen to be very much my thoughts, liberal, left-wing, atheistic, humanistic point of view. But the fact that universities are tailored and streaming people to a single thought thing that they become what the Klingons call their top people are called thought admirals because they dictate what thought is allowed. This is why we decry China, why we decry Russia, where you're not supposedly able to think any free thought. And it's worse. So I just came back, I'm on a tirade here, but I just came back from China. And I was asked, what's the difference between, by Chinese people who don't, their only view of China is from Hollywood, the West is from Hollywood movies, just as for most Westerners, the only view of China is what they see in entertainment. What's the real difference between the West and China these days? And I said, here's the real difference. The real difference is you have no freedom of the press here or free thought. It's censorship from the top down, an authoritarian regime that you have no control over. The difference is in the United States, all the censorship is from the grassroots up. It's people saying, ban this book, take it out of the libraries, not the politicians. And when they do, they're just pandering. It's the grassroots. It's the public saying, I want the same thing they have in China. I want to be able to shut out points of view that I don't agree with. And that is reprehensible and it is horrific. That it's taking root at the grassroots of school boards and public libraries being told you can't have these books, take out the LGBTQ, take out anything that acknowledges that the United States spent decades being a slave-based economy, and then a century or more after that, treating the supposedly liberated slaves as second-class citizens. And when we can't acknowledge that, that has to be purged from the public discourse. That is such unbelievable backwards thinking. It's antithetical to what university and even just general intellectual life is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be a marketplace of ideas where people with differing points of view argue vociferously and hopefully with an open enough mind that somewhere out of that people might change their points of view instead of saying, I was born in this, believing this, and I will die believing this, and nothing will ever persuade me that I am self-righteous and correct.
Yeah, it's interesting. I read the reviews for the downloaded, which is interesting because most people who got downloaded were like your fans.
Well, no. So here's the problem with the downloaded reviews. First, let's point out here that the downloaded has by far more positive reviews than negative. It's trending at 4.0 stars out of 5 out of 1,200 reviews or ratings in just 3 weeks of being out on Audible. So let's not give these little gutter snipes and intellectual weaklings more say than they're entitled to. Yeah. But that said, the negative reviews are people honing in on the politics, the liberal politics of the downloaded. And the downloaded is being marketed, it's being given away for free, right? If you have an Audible account, downloaded is free. And it's being marketed with, Brendan Fraser. Lots of Brendan's fans who have come to it, and there are lots of people who aren't Rob Sawyer fans. Hey, free science fiction, I'll give you a try. Oh, wait, this is science fiction that's supposed to make me think. Oh, and it's supposed to make me think liberal humanist thoughts that I haven't crossed my mind before, or that I fight to suppress in every other corner of my life. Yeah, I'm not going to like it. And that is the downside of the distribution model of this particular thing. And all I can say is I'm laughing all the way to the bank. It's an extremely lucrative project for me. And again, yes, there are going to be negative reviews of anything anybody does. If it has any kind of challenging content to it. But if it doesn't have challenging content, it's not art. It is just the term that Hollywood uses. It's content. It's just fill that container with stuff that people will binge watch mindlessly. It is the opium of the masses, and I don't want any part of that.
Well, it's interesting because the two parts in the book that people seem to get, the ones who got mad about were parts that made sense with the novel. Like one was with Valentina, and
Yeah,
the difference
trans
between their physical body being a man and then their virtual reality mind, they took the shape of a woman and got to explore that. And then like that, like in my mind, that could have been explored way more. I thought there was way more interesting stuff there. People got mad about that just for the idea of like the ability to be something else in a virtual and then come back. It's strange. And then the second thing that got a virulent reaction was the reveal on who the murderer was and why he
Yeah.
murdered.
And there was spoilers here. But
Yeah, no, I don't want to. I don't want to.
and
Yeah.
specific language. And the funny thing is, Audible made me tone down the language, actually, because I was even more pointed and will be in the print version. Somebody at Audible got cold feet. And it was fascinating because the two actors involved in that scene are Vanessa Sears, who is, we don't say African American when we refer to somebody of color in Canada. We say black because we're not obviously American, Canadian. So Vanessa's black Canadian, and Andrew Fung, who is doing the voice of the other character, of course, is also a person of color in Canada. They read the original versions. They had no problem at all. And some white person at Audible got cold feet about the exact wording. We had to. I got a call from the producer. Oh my God, you got a lunch break. You have to rewrite these scenes over lunch, and we're going to do a toned down version. Well, we get it. But yeah, there are people, and it comes back to this, there are people who are so desperate to erase, the original sin of the United States is slavery. And what's unconscionable is that although Lincoln, the Emancipation Proclamation, released the slaves, they were not released into equality and are still fighting today to have, to be treated by that thing. The United States is such a effing dichotomy. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, including, the guys who wrote that, all men, they very deliberately or blind-spotted, of course, excluded women, but by men, they sure as hell didn't mean that all men were created equal. They meant all white men who were property owners are created equal. And everybody else we can own, sleep, and rape, as Thomas Jefferson did repeatedly to his black slave, female slaves, this incredible desire now to expunge instead of learning from that. And then they rise now. Unbelievable to me that we have a rise now of anti-Semitism right now. It's resurgent. You would think after World War II we would have learned our lesson about that. Right now the resurgence of anti-Muslim sentiment is unbelievable. That we're backtracking, and while we backtrack, also covering over the racist past that is so should indelibly be part of the history of the United States. Should be a studied and learned from part of the history of the United States.
Yeah, I agree. I want to say also, what's interesting, man. Okay, man, I wish you guys all read the download it so I could ask. Sorry, what?
No spoilers.
Yeah, I know.
I hate spoilers.
I'm trying so hard not to. I'll just have to message you later.
Okay.
Because there's a reveal in the book. So there's I think I can word this. So the Martian reveals his intention with interviewing everybody. What happens? And there is this probably the most dialogue-heavy scene ever, where every character is throwing something in, getting mad. Brendan Fraser's character is kind of like taking the sociology aspect and arguing. It's almost like a pseudo-court drama.
Yes.
And there is this absolutely hilarious line where the Martian gives his verdict, and then Alan, his false name I believe is Alan Smith or something. I don't want to ruin
Alan Smithy, which is the name.
I don't want to ruin the reveal for his real name. But Alan Smithy immediately says, "I will effing cut you."
Yes,
and then
right.
the Martian says, "You are only proving my point." Like even the way they do the audio is very, very comedic. And I want to ask, like, when you wrote, because now that you said that you kind of just went on the fly with everything, was this scene? Because I read your notes through the Patreon of the original iteration of the book was, and then something that changed. Was that scene always known, or was that something that came out organically and it just shows all the characters like their weaknesses and strengths, or were all these comedic elements kind of planned from the beginning? Oh, we want this to be very light, because I honestly feel like the Downloaded is probably your lightest novel.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's certainly got a lot of humor in it. I crack a lot of jokes in my day-to-day life. I enjoy humor a great deal. I love stand-up comedy when it's done well. There's nothing more painful than watching a stand-up comic die on stage. All alone, she's all alone. They're all alone, and they're just dying. The audience isn't with them. That's like cringe, right? But when it's done right, it's great. And the thing is, people remember humor. If something is said if it's said in a funny, witty way, they remember that. I always say, like 25 years ago, at a science fiction convention, I was asked to be on a panel about nanotechnology. And I didn't know anything about nanotechnology. We didn't have any nanotechnology 25 years ago. And I said, I think the solution to nanotechnology is that we should build things really big, but put them very far away. That's funny, right? People quote that back to me 25 years later. Nobody remembers anything else that was said on that panel with the nanotechnology scientists and with the other writers, but they remember that joke. A joke that lands well is memorable for your whole life. And that's why I love the late night talk shows. I particularly love Stephen Colbert, who does the Tonight Show. But any of these guys, they take the day's news, this is what the writing staff does, and distills it into these incredibly poignant one-liners that say so much more than a whole essay on the topic that'll be forgotten. The New York Times will have op-eds on whatever the issue today is, and Colbert will come and nail it, or Seth Meyers will nail it with one line that just people will remember, and it makes the point vividly. So yeah, I'm a huge believer that humor is not just a way to make it go down a little more easily, right? If you're saying something that could be harsh, but also just a way to make it memorable. And it's so much fun to write funny dialogue, and it's a joy when you have a cast like we have with the Downloaded who are performing it. And Andrew Fung is best known in Canada for his work on a sitcom, most of these actors had really good comedic chops.
So one last quote unquote important to internet question that is something people on the internet argue about for some strange reason is people want to know how tall you are. So there is
how tall I am?
Yeah, there is this argument between who is like the tallest sci-fi writer and where they stand, and so we got to know.
So the tallest working science fiction writer today is probably William Gibson. And the second tallest is probably Harry Harrison. And I'm 5'10" or 177 centimeters, which is slightly taller than average. The average height of, for people born in my year in the West, 1960, the average height of men was 5'8", women was 5'2", I think. Now it's a little bit taller. People are getting taller as we get better diets. I'm 5'10".
Wow.
But Harry and Bill just tower over me.
William Gibson, the writer of the cyberpunk series.
Neuromancer. Yeah, he's well over 6 feet. Skinny people, well over 6 feet.
Really? Wow, I never would have thought. Well, not that it matters, but it
doesn't matter at all. And Harry Harrison, who is the king of alternate history, is also a really tall guy. Stan Robinson is probably a couple of inches taller than me. Kim Stanley Robinson, I would think, is taller than me.
I see.
Larry Niven, much shorter than me. Kevin Anderson, I think, is about an inch shorter than me.
Yeah, Ellison is the shortest male.
Beatty's shortest male. I think there are those who would argue that it had a huge effect on his psychology.
Yeah.
That he was a little guy, probably around who'd been beaten up as a kid, you know, as I was too, for that matter, but that it really he wanted to, you know, really punch above his weight and prove, you know, that he could take on anybody, even though he was only a little guy.
Have you seen his show, Allison Watching? It's an older, I believe it's like only on DVD now. He had sci-fi, so he had a runtime on sci-fi, and he would give these snippets of commentary between movies or about movies or interesting things. And
Well, Allison's watching.
Yeah, Allison's watching. And-
I've seen her walk. He walks like a normal man.
No.
Allison's watching. No, I haven't seen the show, but he also used to do the film column for the magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, which was called probably Allison's Watching. So I've read a lot of his film criticism over the years.
There's this famous episode where he gets a write-in from a little person, and Allison loses his show because he does this rant about little people and himself and other things and political correctness. And then that, like 2 weeks later, he got his show back because the people in that community loved his rant and a few other things he made. So it's really funny. I don't mean to like get off topic here, but I just want to. And then one last like purely indulgent thing. You mentioned you loved 2001, the movie. Have you seen?
I love 2001. Did you say?
Yeah. 2001: Space Odyssey. What did you think of 2010, the movie version, or the future book adaptations? There's an interesting, I guess one scene in specific, there's an interesting scene in the book where the creator of HAL, he's believed to be Indian, I want to say, and he has a thick accent. Chandra. He has a thick accent in the novel, so when he sacrifices himself, or quote unquote, goes sacrifice himself, the reasoning is that the computer will only understand my accent. In 2010, for some strange reason, the actor is a white man with the most like East Coast accent ever.
East Coast accent. Bob Balaban is the actor.
Yeah.
Bob Balaban is a great character actor. He's also in Jaws, for instance. He was popular at that time, but unbelievable that one of the very few people of color written as a character in a novel from that era. Science fiction novel that era got whitewashed out of it. It was Peter Hyams who directed 2010. Just not have a good track record in that area. He did another film, was it later or Capricorn 1, where he does have an African American accent, played by O.J. Simpson. But the O.J. Simpson has about 4 lines in the whole film. So it was lip service to inclusivity, rather than having it be an actual major part in the film. It's reprehensible, And to give him the credit, I think Balaban is still alive. He probably wouldn't do the part today. Fisher Stevens plays an Indian, by which I mean from the subcontinent, character in what's the film? Short Circuit 2. And says that, oh God, cringes with him in brown face and had to do an accent. We're growing up as a species. It's ridiculous that characters get whitewashed out. Or as I had, I had my novel Triggers. I have a character who's a Sikh. And somebody I was working with in Hollywood, an Academy Award winner, said, "Why is he a Sikh? What purpose does that serve in the plot?" I said, "None whatsoever." So then why is he a Sikh? Because there are 20 million Sikhs in the world. Chances are you're going to see them from time to time in all kinds of various professions. They exist. They're people. They have jobs and reasons for being there other than doing some trick where they do something with their turban or some bullshit like that. They're just regular human beings and show up in regular human circumstances. That inclusivity means you have people with a whole panoply of human types doing the whole vast spectrum of things that humans do. Not, we have this person in there, and therefore they have to act as some stereotypical justification for that person of that ethnicity, gender orientation, whatever, to be in this. They're in there because human beings. We're telling stories about the human race.
Yeah, one thing that bothers me about 2010 though is that they still kept that line in where he says, "Oh, I have to go because the computer will recognize my accent," and
Yeah,
it
yeah,
makes
yeah.
so
Ridiculous.
little sense that I had to pause the movie and rewatch that specific scene like 10 times.
Unbelievable, right? Yeah. And Balaban is a great actor. He's also in Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
Yeah.
Right.
But he just, it was a mistake to have him in that role. And I would say for sure, it's, that film came out in 84 or something like that. So we're looking at the 40th anniversary. I'm sure if you ask Balaban today, he would say, no, I should not have taken that part. I should have said, and the casting director should have cast me. I should have called in white guys to play a person of color.
All right, Doctor, that's going to be the. I think people are wrapping up here. You guys got
Yeah, it's 8 o'clock my time.
Yeah, let's
So I
just
gotta
let
go
you
and
go.
see. Adam, what a pleasure. Thank you for organizing this.
No, I have to thank you for even giving us the time. What's funny is if it wasn't you, it would have been one of those ancient alien guys. And so I think you'll be pleased to know that it was you instead.
Well, I'm glad you got me instead of the alien guys. My friend Kevin Granger, who was the science advisor for the reboot of Battlestar Galactica and for the movie Gravity and a bunch of other things, he got roped into being interviewed on some ancient alien shows.
Yes.
And kind of regrets it because he's edited in there with a bunch of freaking nut bars.
That was the episode they got him and Dr. Michio Kaku. And Michio Kaku later said that he thought he was doing an interview about the Big Bang or something and ended up being snapped on because of these rights. So yeah, it's awfully strange how these guys operate. So anyway. But thank you so much, Doctor. I really appreciate it.
You're so welcome. My pleasure. Live long and prosper, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you for your attention and good luck with your studies and enjoy. We've already had our Thanksgiving in Canada. We have it in October because, of course, the harvest comes in earlier up the far north. But enjoy your Thanksgiving. Make the most of it. Have fun.
Doctor. Have a good one. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.